Morning, good afternoon, good evening, dear members, dear colleagues. We're about to start our meeting. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the meeting of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly's General Committee on Political Affairs and Security. My name is Gustavo Pallares. I'm Deputy Secretary General of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, and we're conducting the meeting from the headquarters of the Parliamentary Assembly in Copenhagen. I can see the chair of the committee, Congressman Hudson, is already in our screen. He will be chairing the meeting from Washington. Before passing the floor to the chair of the General Committee on Political Affairs and Security, Congressman Hudson, who will chair our meeting from Washington, as I said, I would like to address several technicalities for our event. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and broadcasted live on YouTube and Facebook. If you have any connection problems, please contact our team, who will do their best to support you. Their contact details will be put in the chat function. We have 6 language interpretation into English, French, German, Russian, and Spanish, and you can select your preferred language by clicking on the little glove at the bottom of the Zoom screen. We have at the moment 30 members signed up on the speakers list under the agenda item 3, open debate. And we will, of course, start with those who signed up in advance. However, I hope that there will be time to also take inscriptions today. If you would like to intervene, please indicate this in the chat function. Due to high interest and our limited time available, all debate participants are requested to limit their interventions to 3 minutes. Please turn on video only when given the floor. Keep your camera off if you don't plan on having interventions during the meeting. Finally, I would encourage all speakers to be succinct and focus in the remarks. Keeping your remarks short and to the point will hopefully mean that we won't have to impose time limitations and that everybody can have the chance to speak. Without further delay, it's my honor to pass the virtual floor to the chair of the General Committee on Political Affairs and Security of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, Congressman Richard Hudson in Washington. Congressman, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Gustavo. Colleagues, I call the meeting of the General Committee on Political Affairs and Security to order. Our first item of business, as usual, is to adopt the committee's agenda. As you will have seen, our meeting today is somewhat different than our usual format for annual sessions, in accordance with the special emergency rules adopted by the Standing Committee in response to the global pandemic. In short, our meeting today will consist of a presentation from our rapporteur and open debate, but no voting. The agenda for this meeting was distributed to all delegations by the Secretariat in advance. I'm not aware of any objections to the agenda. Can I therefore consider it adopted by the committee? The agenda is adopted. Colleagues, as usual, I want to start by thanking the Secretariat for the huge efforts they've made behind the scenes to help us continue our work despite the challenges presented by the pandemic. I'd also like to thank my colleagues in the leadership of the committee, Vice Chair Donava and Rapporteur Kashunas, for our great partnership during this time. Really hopeful this will be the last time our committee will meet in this online format. And I look forward to resuming our normal in-person business as soon as possible. In fact, I myself will be flying to Vienna tomorrow to participate in the limited parts of the annual session that will take place in the Hofburg. Colleagues, while the pandemic has continued to impact how we do our work, we've remained active since our last formal meeting. And I want to take a brief opportunity to share with you 2 examples of our recent activities. On June 14th, I hosted an online parliamentary dialogue on the subject of the role of the OSCE in transparency and predictability in military affairs. On that occasion, we were briefed by 3 experts on the ways in which OSCE participating states are meeting or falling short of our commitments in this area. I learned a great deal about the ways our countries are committed to sharing information about usual and unusual military activities that other participating states are involved in, and some that we may find threatening. And also, I learned about how the confidence building measures implemented through the OSCE can play an important role in shining a light on the most pressing security threats in our region today. I know this event came at a very busy time in all of our parliaments, and that many of our colleagues weren't able to make it and join us. So I wanted to make sure to let you know that it is available for viewing on the Parliamentary Assembly's YouTube channel. And I would encourage you to go to the YouTube and search for OSCE PA, and you'll easily find this very interesting webinar. Secondly, many of you know that on March 24th of this year, I was invited to speak on behalf of the committee to the OSCE's Forum for Security Cooperation, the FSC. In my remarks, I reminded the FSC that the need to build confidence among states, the very core of the FSC's mandate, appears time and again in the declarations adopted by our committee. That includes the resolution we passed at the annual session in 2019, which stated our collective regret regarding, and here I'll quote, the general deterioration in the interlocking architecture of arms control agreements and confidence building and transparency measures, including the Open Skies Treaty, the Conventional Armed Forces in Europe Treaty, and the Vienna document, which have all been undermined by Russian noncompliance, making it necessary for all sides to recommit to the preservation of effective arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation. Colleagues, I know that the committee remains seized with what I believe is the most crucial role of this committee, which is working towards a free and peaceful OSCE zone in which all participating states fully implement the fundamental principles we have all agreed to under the Helsinki Final Act. Today, Mr. Kashunas will present the report he's drafted for our consideration, which reflects his well-considered perspectives on the challenges before us all. He also makes important recommendations on the way forward, which I believe merit close consideration. I want to thank him for his dedicated and impressive work, and I look forward to hearing his presentation. Of course, I also look forward to our debate and hearing the views of all of our committee's members. As I said at the Bureau meeting on June 10th, Lorenz, I want to thank you for your tremendous service to our committee. I look forward to continuing to work with you and all of our committee's members as you close your document to defend the spirit of Helsinki. Now, moving to our third agenda item, colleagues, we will now proceed to the presentation of the report prepared by Mr. Lorenz Kashunas, the rapporteur of our committee. As a reminder, we're working under emergency rules for this remote session, and this meeting will not be like our usual ones at previous annual meetings. Specifically, this means we will not vote on the rapporteur's report or on any other document today. Our work today is therefore focused on our exchange of views. Dear Lorenz, the screen is yours.
Mr. Chairman, hello. Thank you very much for a warm introduction. Dear colleagues, so I will start. I will present main points of my report. Last year, we all marked 45th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act and the 13th anniversary of the Paris Charter for a New Europe, the two documents that form the foundation for our common security. Many commemorative events were organized in Vienna and in our respective capitals. Many speeches with our commitment to the basic OSCE principles were made. However, celebrations and nice speeches aside, the reality on the ground was not and is not so shiny. At the very same time, in some OSCE participating states, these fundamental principles continued to be violated. From military aggression against neighboring countries, occupations, and the illegal annexations of their territories, to blatant violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms. From non-implementation of previously undertaken commitments to unprecedented repressions against political opposition, peaceful protesters, and independent media. It is what we witness, regretfully, every day. Therefore, it is high time to meet our words with actions. We parliamentarians are especially responsible for this, as we must seek our governments accounting for their policies and decisions. So I want to touch upon several critical topics. First of all, this is a crisis of multilateralism. As COVID-19 spread from one country to the next, so did the symptoms of isolationism. This atmosphere has been marked by mounting tensions between participating states and outbreaks of violence. While the aggravation of long-standing rivalries has meant that protracted conflicts carry on unresolved, the arousal of new hostilities has led to fighting elsewhere. The decline of military transparency is linked to the resurgence of these animosities. It is worrying that the absence of consensus among participating states and the preservation and refinement of OSCE-established security structures has left texts like Vienna document outdated and inadequate. Simultaneously, the declaration of sweeping states of emergency and attendant limitations on fundamental freedoms have diminished parliamentary control, enabled the repressions of political opponents, and frustrated the activity of civil society. We have witnessed major political upheavals across OSCE area over the past few months, with the most concerning ones in Russia and in Belarus. The combat of the erosion of mutual trust in the regional security architecture, our respective governments must urgently recommit to the core obligations we have previously undertaken. Participating states need to more consciously reflect on the very origins of OSCE and recognize their shared responsibility in establishing peace and stability going forward. We can play an important part by setting national agendas, reviewing the work of our governments, and raising public awareness. The notion of comprehensive security can only ever be attained once executive and legislative structures join together. Another topic is protracted conflicts in OSCE area. There are several spots of conflicts. First, Russia-Ukraine conflict. 7 years have passed since the Russian Federation annexation of Crimea and the start of Russia war against Ukraine, which shows no signs of abating. Only this spring, unusual Russian military activity in the vicinity of Ukraine and in the illegally annexed Crimea drew international attention. This goes against Russia's OSCE commitments, as well as several OSCE Parliamentary Assembly exhortations for the Russian Federation to withdraw all its troops from Ukraine's internationally recognized borders. Therefore, we continue to condemn this in strongest possible terms, and we will insist our governments maintain respective sanctions against Russia until sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders is be fully restored. I once again reiterate our collective call on Russia to stop its aggression against neighboring Ukraine and to find political will to resolve this conflict peacefully and to take necessary actions. Russia is a party to this conflict, not a mediator. It has signed Minsk agreements and Normandy summit decisions, and therefore shares responsibility in implementing them. We also saw 6 weeks intense combat in Nagorno-Karabakh, which ended on 9th November 2020, when a ceasefire finally took effect by a trilateral statement between Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Russia. However, this statement ended at the active phase of hostilities, but not the conflict itself. Any lasting political solution to it is only possible with the participation of the OSCE Minsk Group, not just one of its members. I wish to extend our full support to OSCE Minsk Group and its co-chairs. Concerning conflict in Georgia, territorial integrity of this country was already mentioned in OSCE Parliamentary Assembly as a resolution in Luxembourg. 13 years ago, Russia invaded in Georgia, asserted control over a fifth of its territory, and in the regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. It is legally confirmed by the European Court of Human Rights decision, with Georgia's territories are under Russia's occupation. Therefore, we call on Russia to implement this European Court of Human Rights decision without further delay and in good faith. I also repeat our long-standing call for Russia to implement its commitments under the EU-mediated ceasefire agreement of August 2008. Likewise, the partition of Moldova persists, whereas the situation in Transnistria has been rather stable. Further negotiations are plainly needed to help overcome divisions between the left and the right banks of the Dniester. A third topic is cybersecurity. It is undoubtedly an important issue in today's security agenda. Relevance of this topic and its potential impact is recognized worldwide and has a big attention within the OSCE as the cyber attacks are becoming a weapon of war nowadays. One simply has to imagine the manipulation of elections, theft of confidential government data, or interventions in the healthcare systems. And to imagine how dangerous it is. The potential cross-border consequences of any such incident obviously necessitate harmonized international regulation. Cybersecurity is not just a new factor in the relations between participating states, but also between governments and their citizens. The endorsement of a human-centric approach to cybersecurity has been one of the principal objectives for Swedish chairpersonship, highlighting the role of the individual in this dimension. Ladies and gentlemen, while COVID-19 may have brought the rest of the world to a grinding halt, it did not stop organized criminal networks from the pursuit of their illicit ambitions. The trafficking of arms, drugs, and people represents a lucrative enterprise whose yearly revenue is steadily growing. In some instances, the demand for such services has risen exponentially due to the stricter controls imposed amid the pandemic. The elimination of such transnational organized crimes requires effective and democratic institutions accountable to the citizens. Hence, the fight against terrorism remains one of the priorities of OSCE chairmanship. The ad hoc committee on countering terrorism has hosted several meetings at which members examined COVID-19 induced changes in radicalization trends. The collaboration with the key partners and other interparliamentary platforms and many of these events have provided valuable opportunities to share lessons learned and best practices. We must lead by example and seek the passage of model legislation on the persecution of terrorists and assistance to victims in compliance with international law. Besides the unresolved conflicts, we also saw unprecedented repressions against political opponents, independent media, human rights defenders, and peacefully protesters in some OSCE participating states, especially in Belarus. The solution to the crisis arisen due to the forged presidential elections on 9th August 2020 is only possible through inclusive national dialogue, what would lead to holding new, fair, and democratic election under the supervision of ODIHR and other international observers based on OSCE standards. As well as Belarusian authorities must implement all recommendations of Professor Wolfgang Benedek's report, comply with its OSCE commitments and international human rights standards. In this context, we should draw attention to the most recent incident on May 23, when civilian aircraft was landed forcefully by Belarusian authorities in order to detain Roman Protasevich, the leading Belarusian blogger and one of the founders of online news platform Nexta. We call for the immediate release of all Belarusian political prisoners, the total number of whom has recently crossed 400. The forced landing of a civilian plane was an unprecedented attack against civilian aviation, and such state-sponsored act of terrorism posed a threat to the safety of international civil aviation. We also strongly condemn the poisoning, subsequent detention, and sentencing of Alexei Navalny. Similar attacks against the other leaders of opposition, as well as the brutal attacks against the peaceful protesters in many cities of Russia. We join our international partners in their call to immediately release Alexei Navalny and our political prisoners, and to ensure the right for peaceful assembly, as well as the right of opinion and media freedom in Russia. In times like this, when our common values are increasingly being called into a question, we parliamentarians must be bold and decisive in our response. COVID-19 will be far from the last unexpected challenge that we will have to face in the years to come. If all of us jointly and soundly defend the spirit of Helsinki, we will weather future crises and ensure comprehensive security of our constituents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurenus. Let's move now to the next item on our agenda, the open debate on the report. For technical purposes, I've asked Gustavo and the International Secretariat to moderate our discussion. So Gustavo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Rapporteur, for the presentation of the report. We now have, I think the total is around 33 members have asked to speak. We have limited the speaking time to 3 minutes for each intervention. I will call first on the Vice Chair of the Political Affairs and Security Committee, Mr. Costel Dunava from Romania. Please, Mr. Vice Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gustavo. Thank you also for all your efforts, what you did to organize our activity in the last 2 years. Thank you also to Richard and Laurenus for our common efforts, what we did to rule the activity of this committee. Dear colleagues, allow me please to briefly point out just few ideas interlinked with our debated report, which I consider very pertinent. The European security is ensured only when we can count on the essential premise that all participating states, without exception, are fulfilling their commitments entirely, unconditionally, and in good faith, while fully observing the fundamental principles such as they have been defined in the UN Charter or in the Helsinki Final Act. We should not forget that the outstanding instruments, namely the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe, the Treaty on Open Skies, and the Vienna document remain the main pillars which, together with other relevant mechanisms on confidence and security building measures, continue to represent the core of our common approach to security in the field of arms control. Each instrument is important in itself and has its specific contribution to security and stability in the OSCE area. We strongly believe that their observance and modernization are appropriate to lead to an improvement of the security climate based on mutual trust, transparency, balance, and cooperation among the participants. In our view, stability and predictability means the implementation in good faith of existing arms control instruments and confidence and security building measures. Our constant position is that we must not build new mechanisms or new regime, but we must respect and implement what we have to keep the acquis on arms control and not allow regionalization of security. We do not need to reinvent any wheels, but to make the existing wheels move properly. Current security context provides also a good opportunity to start engaging constructively in the process of modernizing the Vienna document, or to focus more on the gray areas which are not covered by current instruments, mechanism of military transparency. Updating of the Vienna document according to the proposal put forward by the 34 participating states and as supported by an even more important number of states during the 2020 Ministerial Council remain a priority. National parliaments have a role to play in this respect. The Vienna document has brought about increased transparency and mutual confidence as regards the military forces and military activities of all OSCE participating states. We have to redouble our efforts, and the national parliaments can certainly substantially contribute in this respect towards more understanding and cooperation, towards enhancing transparency and predictability. The most important way of ensuring predictability is the respect for mutually agreed rules. Ignoring them, on the other hand, makes the world less predictable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. Now we have 4 interventions from 4 Vice Presidents of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. I call first on Ms. Carrie Hendrickson, Vice President from Norway. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to Mr. Hudson for his good leadership in the first committee. And I will also thank Conjorian for the report, which raises very important issues regarding the security in our region. It's a thorough report and it points out some important threats for our security. It's no doubt that fundamental liberties is violated throughout our region. Illegal annexation, arbitrary imprisonments, restrictions in the right to assembly, severe limitations in civil organizations' life, and other in many ordinary people's lives is at threat in many regions in the OSCE. And this makes the people suffer. They suffer because they became insecure and they have severe restrictions on their everyday lives. It also leads to death and to illness for many people. So this is one of the core issues for our organization to take stand against. In many countries, there are also other security threats that nourish extreme nationalism, racism, and discrimination ideologies that can recruit people to terrorism and violence, which again threatens the lives of religious ethnic minorities, women, disabled, and people with minority sexual orientation. In democratic societies, the answer is multilateralism and dialogue, cross countries and cross organizations, and I will also say cross political lines. As Kostel said, we must respect and implement what we have as tools in our organization. And we as parliamentarians must encourage such dialogue and seek for solutions and strengthen our efforts to raise these challenges also in our own parliaments and in the parliament of the OSCE. We as parliamentarians are the solutions, and the solutions lies in the strength of the OSCE PA and the work we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Hendrickson.
Check the phone number, actually.
Now I call on Vice President Senator Roger Wicker from the US, please.
Thank you, Gustavos. And Laurenas has provided us with a very, very comprehensive and excellent report. There are things in it that we don't like to hear, but we need to hear them. We've all agreed to these principles from decades and decades ago, and Laurenas is correct to point out where members have failed in this regard. And I regret that it's necessary for member after member in this committee to once again mention the shortcomings of the Russian Federation, the fact that they continue to wage a deadly war against the neighbor of Ukraine, the fact that Georgia continues to have its sovereign territory occupied by a member of our Parliamentary Assembly, the fact that human rights are being violated and that political leaders are being imprisoned. These are things that we don't like to hear, but they need to be told. And so I thank our rapporteur for being forthright in this regard. Since the committee last met, we've seen escalations from Moscow, including the massive military buildup in April around the Ukrainian territory. We should highlight that this gave us a perfect opportunity to put into action some of the key OSCE mechanisms. And Ukraine requested that we do so, but Russia has failed to provide sufficient information as in response. For my part, I think we should never recognize illegal occupation of territory, either in Georgia or Ukraine. And I long for the day when our friends in Moscow and our friends in the Russian Federation will be back into compliance with the rule of law. Of course, we're also concerned about a number of other areas, including the fighting in and around Nagorno-Karabakh, the unacceptable continuation of the tragic situation in Belarus, for which I don't have enough time to elaborate. But again, Lorena's made a very strong statement there. It is absolutely unacceptable that a government down have a forced landing of a civilian aircraft for the purpose of imprisoning a reporter. So on a positive note, there are I appreciate our rapporteur outlining trends in the cyber domain, reminding us that the OSCE has made significant contributions in this area. I'll be leading a delegation to Vienna and we leave tomorrow. Those of us who will be able to attend in person will have a refreshing change from these virtual meetings, and I look forward to continuing debate. And once again, thank Mr. Kashunas for an excellent report.
Thank you, Senator Wicker. Next in the list, Vice President Margareta Cederfelt from Sweden, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Chair, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start to thank the leadership of the First Committee for their important work, and particular Mr. Laurinas Kaskunas for his excellent report. The report it includes several of the very important issue when it comes to security issue in the OSCE region. And it highlights several conflicts areas, and some of them have a long history, and the solution seems unfortunately far away. Those who suffer most of the conflicts are ordinary people like women, children, elderly, but also young people whose dream for the future is broken. The rapporteur's conclusion is essential, and I do agree on the need to uphold international system and agreements. Let me mention Ukraine, a European country, a very close country for several European countries, are in war. A war that has gone on since the 20th of February 2014, when Ukrainian people raised their voice for a membership in European Union. And what have happened since this, we all know. We have discussed it several times in OSCE, but I would like to mention that this week, have this OSCE Secretary General and the chairperson in office highlight the need for transparency in military activity by Russia in the Black Sea as well as in Ukraine. And this is because the background is that Russia had increased its military activity during the last months, just as well as the restriction of access to part of the Black Sea. In the Donetsk-Luhansk region, have the OSCE SMM reported increased military activity from Russia. One Ukrainian soldier have been killed by Russia some days ago. I'm very sad when I read this. The European Union have prolonged its sanctions against Russia because of its illegal annexation of Crimea. Ukraine doesn't stand alone. Europe stands behind Ukraine's rights to its territorium and request for peace. The Russian aggression against Ukraine need to end, and to end as soon as possible, because it's against the OSCE commitment that Russia have signed up for. It's against Ukraine's the international recognized border. And the best way to do this, it would be if Russia today say that they respect the commitments they have given to OSCE today. Thank you very much once again, Mr. Rapporteur and Mr. Chair and Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Sederfeld. Next on the list is Vice President Asai Guliev from Azerbaijan, please.
Thank you very much, dear Gustavo, dear leadership of the First Committee. It is really nice to meet you online and hope to gather with some of you in Vienna soon. Let me also thank Conjorian for his efforts in drafting this report. But I have a number of proposals and comments on which I'm going to brief you. On the paragraph related to the protracted conflicts in the OSCE area, I suggest to remove subtitle Nagorno-Karabakh and rename it into post-conflict situation between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Because after signing of the joint statement on November 10, 2020, the so-called Nagorno-Karabakh conflict doesn't exist anymore and it shouldn't be referred to as a protracted conflict. The mentioned statement has put an end to the almost 3 decades long armed conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan and covers much broader prospects than the ceasefire agreement, creating a ground for normalization of relations between two countries on the basis of the mutual recognition and respect for each other's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and inviolability of the internationally recognized borders. About the role of the Minsk group in post-conflict stage. Although the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairmanship couldn't do anything in resolution of the conflict as an institution, I do believe that they could have a role to play in implementation of November agreement, resolution of the remaining issues related to the establishment of good neighborly interstate relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan, opening communications in the region, returning back of former IDPs to their place of origin, demining, rebuilding, and reconstruction efforts of all territories affected by the conflict, launching negotiations on a peace agreement to achieve a final political statement between two countries, rather than absolute notions and conflict narratives advocated by Armenia. Concerning the point of prisoners of war, please take a special note that according to the Geneva Conventions of 1949, Azerbaijan has returned all prisoners of war and detainees to Armenia. What concerns the members of Separatist group of Armenia, which penetrated into our territories on 26 November 2020, after the war has ended, 4 Azerbaijani servicemen were killed, 1 civilian was wounded as a result of their terror act. This is why they cannot be considered as prisoners of war and be released under the paragraph 8 of the trilateral statement. Currently, these perpetrators are on trial for their crimes. Recently, the European Court of Human Rights also rejected Armenia's request to immediately release under the status of war prisoners the Armenian nationals currently detained in Azerbaijan. Unfortunately, as if it was not enough, Armenia sent another separatist group on 27 May 2021 for planting landmines on the roads of the recently liberated Karabakh region of Azerbaijan. As a result of countermeasures, 6 members of this group were detained. However, on June 4, 3 civilians, including 2 journalists, were killed and 4 others were injured in the mine explosion on the road in the same region of Azerbaijan. Dear colleagues, for you to know that since the war ended, more than 144 Azerbaijanis have fallen victim to landmines planted by Armenia in liberated areas. 27 of them died. Despite international demands, Armenia still refuses to present maps of minefields, which is a gross violation of international humanitarian law and also war crime against my country. The last point about the border demarcation and delimitation issue. Azerbaijan is resolute to establishing the border protection system in the liberated territories within its internationally recognized borders in accordance with the trilateral statement. The border demarcation and delimitation are a bilateral issue, and Armenia's attempt to involve the third party is unacceptable. These issues should be exclusively resolved through the established channels of communication between the border authorities of the countries. For this purpose, Azerbaijan proposed Armenia to set up a joint commission to start bilateral discussions according to the international practice. Dear Rapporteur, I hope you will take into consideration above-mentioned facts while further improving your draft report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice President Guliev. Now we continue with the list of speakers. Next in the list is Ms. Irene Caralambitis from Cyprus, please.
Hello, dear colleagues. I'm glad that this year we are able to conduct an annual session. I sincerely hope that we will overcome this pandemic soon, and none is protected until everyone is protected regarding vaccinations. Now, what's the current political situation? Dormant conflicts swiftly become dangerous hotbeds of tension and instability. The goal of building mutual trust remains elusive, while violations of commitments are commonplace. Cyprus is a part of this reality. Turkey is exacerbating provocations and attempts to create new facts on the ground and in the sea. The information we have is that ahead of President Erdogan's visit on the occupied areas on 20th of July, on the anniversary of Turkish invasion, activity and works contrary to UN resolutions are underway with the purpose of enabling Mr. Erdogan to make announcements regarding Varosha during this visit. This is an act of violation of the relevant UN Security Council resolutions 550 and 789. It's a cause of great concern and forms part of a pattern of Turkish behavior that is characterized by provocations, escalation, and an expansionist policy in the region. It also coincides with the alarming backsliding in rule of law and human rights internally in Turkey. Despite the clear messages by the international community, the UN Security Council, and the June conclusions of the European Council of the Heads of State, Turkey remains defiant and in disregard of international legality. The international community cannot remain idle while Turkey is creating a new fate on EU territory. Furthermore, in the context of UN efforts to restart negotiations, the Turkish side is now claiming a two-state solution instead, which runs counter to relevant UN Security Council resolutions and the agreed UN negotiating framework. Moreover, Turkish partitionist claims have been explicitly rejected by the international community and the UN Secretary General in particular as a non-starter for negotiations. The president of EU, Ursula von der Leyen, was equally clear in this regard. In addition, over the past 4 years, Cyprus has had to deal with increased migration flows from Turkey. More than 70% of applicants for international protection in Cyprus come directly from Turkey and through the areas not under the effective control of the government of the Republic of Cyprus. It is important to note that the vast majority of irregular flows is not a consequence of search and rescue operations, but rather the consequence of irregular crossings of the Green Line, which is not a border. Our Turkish Cypriot compatriots have recently took to the streets to protest the policy of naturalizations that change the demographic character of the island. Today, published in Yeni Düzen, there is a letter addressed to Mr. Çavuşoğlu of the Republican Party, protesting about the behavior of Turkey our compatriots, Turkish Cypriots, did that. Thank you all. See you in Vienna. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me remind everybody about the 3-time limit set by the chair for the debate. I also want to remind members that if you are going to be reading from a prepared statement, you can share it with us in the secretariat, either via the chat or directly sending it to us to facilitate the work of our interpreters. Next in the list, Mr. Vladimir Yavarov, Russian Federation, please.
Спасибо, уважаемые коллеги, уважаемый председатель. Однобокий и заведомо конфронтационный доклад господина Качунаса свидетельствует о том, что, к сожалению, нам нужно приложить еще немало усилий для того, чтобы найти выход из ряда глобальных затянувшихся конфликтов. Например, по внутриукраинскому конфликту не прозвучало главного, а именно безальтернативной основой его урегулирования является Минский комплекс мер, утвержденный, кстати, резолюцией Совета Безопасности Организации Объединенных Наций. Главная угроза урегулированию – саботаж украинских властей в выполнении его положений, попытки его переписать. Киев до сих пор не отказывается от силового варианта решения кризиса, уклоняется от прямого диалога с Донецком и Луганском, необходимость которого четко прописана в пунктах комплекса мер Минских соглашений. Несколько раз докладчики говорили о том, что идет война между Россией и Украиной. За эти 7 лет не было представлено ни одного документального доказательства, что российские войска участвуют в каких-то военных действиях на Украине. Более того, Украина наращивает торговый оборот с Россией. Около 3 миллионов украинских граждан спокойно работают в Российской Федерации и переводят заработанные деньги себе на родину. Хотел сказать еще о той поправке к закону о языках, которая была принята на Украине в прошлом году. Вы знаете, что с 1 сентября 2020 года украинские школьники, русские, для которых русский язык является родным языком, не имеют права обучаться на родном языке. А ведь в этой стране более половины граждан являются носителями русского языка и считают русский язык для себя родным. Вчера, к сожалению, был принят еще один закон о коренных народах Украины, согласно которому народы, которые населяли Украину задолго до появления украинского государства, считаются не коренными, а считаются национальными меньшинствами. Русских, которых практически около 30-40% на Украине, оказываются людьми без прав. И вот несколько слов прозвучало от коллеги, сенатора-американца, беспрецедентной посадки самолета в Белоруссии. Ну, я хотел бы при этом напомнить коллеге из Соединенных Штатов Америки, что имела место беспрецедентная посадка главы государства, президента Боливии в свое время, который возвращался из Москвы в поисках так называемого преступника Сноудена. И последний момент, о котором я хотел сказать. Все многие говорят о необходимости сохранить мир, выходить из конфликтов. Сейчас во многих выступлениях звучат слова о недавнем армяно-азербайджанском кровавом конфликте. Много говорилось в разных странах о необходимости его прекращения, а реально прекратила его только Россия. И только российские миротворцы обеспечивают мир в настоящее время в данном регионе. Спасибо.
Thank you. Next in the list, Mr. Nicholas Samkaradze from Georgia, please.
Thank you. Greetings from Tbilisi, Georgia. Thank you, Mr. Kashunas, for your report and for covering Georgia's problem of occupied territories in the report. Unfortunately, after 13 years of Georgian-Russian war, I do not have positive news from Georgia about the international law principles being upheld in this region. We are extremely concerned with Russia's growing military presence and projecting power in the South Caucasus and Black Sea region, and express great concern that in parallel, Moscow has intensified the annexation process of Georgia's occupied territories and continues daily provocations amid the coronavirus crisis and seriously destabilizes the situation on the ground. And the region undoubtedly harbors risks of further confrontations. What are these daily provocations? It's the so-called borderization process, putting up barbed wires in people's orchards and vineyards, and effectively drawing an occupation line inside the country. It's closure of the occupation line. It's illegal detention of people and local residents, kidnappings and ethnic discrimination. My previous speaker just spoke about the rights of Russian speakers in Ukraine. And dear colleague, I want to remind you that your country has deprived the Georgian children the right of primary education in schools in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And since they don't speak any other language, they have been left without education. So I would like to ask you, before speaking about Russian language speakers, also to consider this issue. I would like to mention the unprecedented international legal victory of Georgia against Russia in the ECHR that has delivered a historical judgment confirming Russia's occupation and effective control over Abkhazia and South Ossetia, Russia's responsibility for killing, torture, ill treatment, looting, and burning of houses of ethnic Georgians, for deprivation of rights of IDPs and refugees to return to their homes. And it is of utmost importance that the international community gives due consideration to this ECHR judgment and effectively uses this legal instrument to push Russia to stop its illegal administration, illegal occupation and administrative practice of human rights violations. With all these new security challenges, including intensified hybrid warfare, we democracies, I think, should stand together to counter this aggressive stance in the region for the sake of our common values and principles and for the sake of European security. We, Georgia, call on Russia to withdraw the recognition, the illegal recognition of the so-called independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and implement ceasefire agreement of August 2008 in order to restore relations between Georgia and Russia and to support peace and stability in the South Caucasus and the wider Black Sea region and in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next in the list of speakers, Mr. Joseph Dietli from Switzerland, please.
Danke, Gustavo. Herr Vorsitzender Hudson, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, sehr geehrte Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Zunächst möchte ich mich bedanken bei dem Rapporteur, Herrn Kashunas, für den sehr interessanten Vortrag. Ich würde gern in meiner Ausführung auf ein weiteres multilaterales Dokument aufmerksam machen, welches aus derselben Zeit wie die Charta von Paris stammt, nämlich der OSZE-Verhaltenskodex zu politisch-militärischen Aspekten der Sicherheit. Der OSZE-Verhaltenskodex enthält Normen und Prinzipien zur Regelung des Verhaltens von Streit- und Sicherheitskräften sowohl im innerstaatlichen als auch im zwischenstaatlichen Rahmen. Im Kontext aktueller geopolitischer und militärischer Situationen erlangt die vollumfängliche Umsetzung der Bestimmungen des OSZE-Verhaltenskodex eine zentrale Bedeutung. Dies betrifft die Einhaltung von Völkerrecht und die Sicherstellung der demokratischen Kontrolle der Streit- und Sicherheitskräfte in zwischenstaatlichen Konflikten, wie zum Beispiel in Bergkarabach. Es betrifft auch den Einsatz derselben in inneren Angelegenheiten, wie zum Beispiel die Proteste in Weißrussland, Russland und in den USA und das Verhalten der Sicherheitskräfte sowie bei der Umsetzung von außerordentlichen Maßnahmen, wie zum Beispiel bei der Covid-19-Pandemie. Ich wollte Sie darüber informieren, dass die Schweiz plant, zusammen mit der OSZE, des Geneva Center for Security, Sector Governance, mit einer Politikstudie zu beauftragen, welche spezifisch die Einhaltung der Normen und Prinzipien des OSZE-Verhaltenskodex während der Covid-19-Pandemie untersucht. Insbesondere wichtig ist die Einhaltung von Menschen- und Grundrechten durch die Streit- und Sicherheitskräfte gegenüber der Zivilbevölkerung. Aus Schweizer Sicht ist ein demokratisch kontrollierter Sicherheitssektor ein wesentlicher Faktor für die Verbesserung der Sicherheit, auch im internationalen Kontext und insbesondere in einer Krise wie der Covid-19-Pandemie. Ich danke Ihnen für die Aufmerksamkeit.
Thank you very much. Next in the list of speakers, Mr. Mikita Poturay from Ukraine, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, Mr. Chair, distinguished colleagues. We remain gravely concerned over the presence of additional significant number of troops and military equipment of the Russian Federation along the border with Ukraine and in the temporary occupied Crimea and its territorial waters remaining after the completion of exercises. Moreover, the announcement by the Russian defense minister of formation of new military units in the Western Military District, adjacent to the borders of Ukraine, the Baltic states, Finland and Poland, and supplying additional weapons to this district raise our serious concerns about Russia's real intentions behind these actions and call into question its willingness to contribute to reducing tensions. We call upon Russia to withdraw immediately all additional troops, weapons, military equipment, warships redeployed at occupied Crimea and territorial waters of Ukraine in the course of the exercises. In light of the ongoing militarization of Crimea and impediments of access to the Ukrainian ports, we are convinced that the OSCE SMM should eventually start paying due attention to these issues. At the same time, we want to thank British government and HMS Defender crew for reminding to Russian Federation that Crimea is Ukraine. Regretfully, we have to recognize that since our discussions in February this year, the overall situation around the OSCE SMM activities in Ukraine has been further deteriorating. Russian occupation administrations in the temporary occupied parts of Luhansk and Donetsk regions of Ukraine continue restricting the SMM's freedom of movement and impeding the mission's activities, especially in the areas adjacent to the segment of the state border between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, which is temporarily not under control by the government of Ukraine. I also would like to stress that informational war is going on against Ukraine. And another cynical example of this war is the latest speech of President Putin, where he blamed us that the law on the rights of indigenous people, which was adopted by Verkhovna Rada and signed by President Zelensky, suppressed the rights of national minorities. I have to remind that Russian Federation has the same law since 1999. When Mr. Putin served as Russian Prime Minister. Rada will adopt the law on the rights of national minorities in closest future. But the only thing that was done by the law on the rights of indigenous people is to give them guarantees according to UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which was ratified by Rada in 2014. And emotional reaction of Mr. Putin for this law can be explained only because our three indigenous ethnic groups, according to this law, live in occupied Crimea. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next in the list of speakers, Mr. Andrei Savinik from Belarus, please.
Уважаемые коллеги, белорусская делегация не может согласиться с представленным докладом, поскольку он искажает события в Беларуси, причем искажает фундаментальным образом. Мы сталкиваемся с любопытным механизмом. Лживые утверждения начинают воспроизводиться в разных документах, постоянно увеличивая масштаб искажения. Возникает паутина источников, которые полностью лишают наблюдателя реальной картины происходящего. И я умоляю, давайте не будем врать. Мы не принуждали самолет к посадке. Точно такая же ситуация произошла неделю спустя случая в Беларуси, в Берлине. Это говорит как минимум о том, что пилот действовал в соответствии с международными инструкциями. Я понимаю, что ложь, повторенная многократно, может на какое-то время выглядеть как правда, но в любом случае она от этого не становится истиной. Возвращаясь к реальной ситуации, я хочу сказать следующее. Спецслужбы Польши и Литвы под кураторством ЦРУ координировали и направляли не только протестные настроения, но и провоцировали проведение уличных акций. В самом начале на этих акциях наблюдалась очевидная тенденция на эскалацию насилия. Совершались наезды автомобилями на сотрудников органов правопорядка. Использовались коктейли Молотова, камни и палки для нанесения увечий. Да, эти попытки были пресечены, но они были пресечены таким же образом, как это делается властями Нидерландов, Германии, Польши, Франции, да, собственно, всех стран, где организуются несанкционированные уличные акции. Достаточно есть документальных подтверждений на этот счет. Вдумайтесь в эту ситуацию и на секунду представьте себе, что в отношении вашей страны несколько стран-членов ОБСЕ пытались организовать перехват власти через использование сценария цветной революции. И в этой связи возникает серьезный вопрос. Как попытка перехвата власти, организованная при участии спецслужб соседних государств, может повлиять на атмосферу межгосударственного доверия и взаимодействия в регионе ОБСЕ? Другой важный вопрос, который также требует ответа. Почему формы представительной демократии подменяются методами уличных протестов? Почему права меньшинства включают также право на дезорганизацию общества? Почему меньшинству дается право говорить от имени граждан целой страны? Многие из вас еще не так давно были уверены, что цветные революции – это удел стран со слабыми государственными институтами и традициями. События, связанные с президентскими выборами в США, показали, что это не так. Я призываю всех парламентариев подумать над этими вопросами и, может быть, попытаться остудить горячие головы в исполнительных ветвях власти, поскольку эти действия по меньшей мере являются безответными. Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you very much. Next in the list of speakers, Mr. Ike Conjorian from Armenia, please.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. As you know, last fall, Azerbaijan, with direct support of Turkey and foreign terrorist fighters, unleashed military aggression against Nagorno-Karabakh and against Armenian people. On 9th of November, ceasefire agreement was signed. And according to the statement, all prisoners of war and detainees should be immediately released and returned to their countries. Unfortunately, until this period of time, Azerbaijan didn't fulfill its obligation according to trilateral statement. And unfortunately, Azerbaijan continues to its inhuman and degrading treatment against Armenia's prisoners of war. Dear colleagues, on May 20, the European Parliament, by an overwhelming majority, passed a resolution on Armenian prisoners of war held in Azerbaijani captivity, which also touched upon the broader context of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and regional security. The resolution stipulates a clear demand for the immediate and unconditional release of all Armenian prisoners of war and civilians captured during or after the war. An addressed call is made to the Azerbaijani government to provide an exhaustive list of all prisoners held in its captivity, of information on their health, including of those who have died in captivity. At the same time, a grave concern was expressed about credible reports, according to which Armenian prisoners of war and other captive persons have been and are being held in degrading conditions, and that they have been subjected to inhuman treatment and torture. Dear colleagues, we strongly condemn the prosecution carried out by Azerbaijan against the Armenian prisoners of war and captured civilians on false charges. According to international law, prisoners of war cannot be prosecuted for their participation in the military actions. At the same time, amid the policy of widespread hatred against Armenians in Azerbaijan and the state-sponsored racism, it is obvious that the ongoing trials cannot be fair and transparent. Dear colleagues, Azerbaijan continues to blatantly violate a number of fundamental documents it has adhered to, including to the European Convention on Human Rights, the UN Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the UN Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, and particularly the Third Geneva Convention. Dear colleagues, Azerbaijan tries to politicize this purely humanitarian issue and tries to use the issue and the problem of prisoners of war as a leverage to put pressure on Armenia on about different aspects. Dear colleagues, since 12th of May, Azerbaijani military units invaded sovereign territories of Armenia. Till now, they continue to violate internationally recognized borders of Armenia. We strongly condemn the use of force by the Azerbaijani side against the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the Republic of Armenia, and emphasize that the military political leadership of Azerbaijan bears the responsibility for all the actions of Azerbaijani armed forces and its consequences. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next in the list is Mr. Radu Mihail from Romania, please. Miss. Yeah.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, I would like to thank our rapporteur, Mr. Kashunas, for his work and for the excellent report he prepared. I would like to reassert the importance of giving priority to the items related to the core business of the OSCE, in particular to the resolution of conflicts, active or protracted, that gravely undermine the European security and the climate of trust among us. The process of mediation, negotiation, and ultimately resolution of conflicts in the OSCE area is an essential part of our mandate and must be at the very heart of our political agenda. The conflict in Ukraine continues to undermine stability in Europe, as well as the already fragile security environment around the Black Sea, marked by the protracted conflicts in the Republic of Moldova, Georgia, as well as Nagorno-Karabakh. Dear colleagues, let me share with you one point that we consider extremely important about the Transnistrian conflict. We must remain firmly committed to support its comprehensive, peaceful, and sustainable settlement based on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic of Moldova within its internationally recognized borders, with a special status for Transnistria and without affecting Republic of Moldova's path towards a European future. We strongly believe that the 5+2 format remains the only one that guarantees the legitimacy and transparency for lasting solution in the settlement process. We hope that the Russian Federation will understand rapidly that its compliance with international law, its active and positive participation in such efforts as 5+2, are part of the only path towards gaining the trust of its neighbors and building a respected position in the region and in the world. Otherwise, with all our joint efforts within OSCE, OSCE, and other forums, it is likely that the current gaps will deepen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next in the list is Mr. José Asensi. Señor Asensi de España, tiene usted la palabra. Señor Asensi, no le escuchamos. ¿Tiene usted apagado el...?
Ahora, muchas gracias.
Ahora sí, adelante.
Buenas tardes,
Gracias.
señor presidente. Un saludo afectuoso a todos los colegas parlamentarios que participan en esta asamblea de verano de la organización. Intervengo como senador del Reino de España y quiero felicitar en primer lugar al relator de esta comisión, el señor Caustinas, por su excelente informe. Un informe que nos permite debatir sobre las cuestiones que afectan directamente a nuestras sociedades en el ámbito político y de seguridad y que también afectan a la propia organización. Agradecemos a todos los gobiernos el esfuerzo realizado para combatir la pandemia, aún no vencida, que tanto dolor ha producido entre la población, al tiempo que enviamos nuestras condolencias a las familias que han perdido sus seres queridos. Nuestros esfuerzos en esta lucha deben dirigirse también a aquellos países del mundo menos afortunados en recursos y en capacidad de respuesta sanitaria. La pandemia ha puesto de manifiesto el valor fundamental de la cooperación, pues sin cooperación a escala global no acabaremos con ella. También ha tenido consecuencias negativas en términos de desigualdad, pobreza, agudización de los conflictos y debilitamiento de la democracia. Compartimos el corazón del informe que se hace eco de la grave crisis del multilateralismo, como demuestran los conflictos enquistados en el propio seno de la OSCE, así como otras amenazas que el informe recoge con todo rigor. Nosotros apostamos por reforzar el multilateralismo frente a quienes erosionan la confianza en las instituciones democráticas y menosprecian el papel de las organizaciones internacionales, como es el caso de nuestra organización. No creemos en la necesidad de crear estructuras nuevas, sino en recuperar los principios originarios de la OSCE y reivindicar el enorme potencial que tiene como instrumento de prevenir y resolver conflictos mediante la diplomacia y la cooperación. Desde España apoyamos por una mayor atención al eje mediterráneo como espacio en el cual la organización tiene un campo abonado donde desplegar su misión. Queremos mostrar nuestra satisfacción por la comprensión y solidaridad con España desde todos los organismos tras los sucesos recientes en la frontera sur, en las ciudades españolas de Ceuta y Melilla, hechos que demuestran la necesidad de buenas políticas de seguridad y cooperación en este ámbito. En tanto consideramos que son factores decisivos para lograr la paz y la seguridad, estamos comprometidos con la defensa de los derechos humanos y la democracia, con la universalización de la sanidad, la educación y los servicios de atención social, con la igualdad efectiva entre hombres y mujeres, con la protección de los derechos de todas las minorías. Tenemos que sumar esfuerzos para que las propuestas que se realicen en esta dirección abran el camino para lograr una mejor seguridad, más democracia y más respeto por los derechos humanos. Ojalá podamos vernos en persona en la próxima reunión. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Next in the list of speakers, Mr. Grigory Karasin from the Russian Federation, please.
Спасибо большое, господин председатель. Я хотел бы категорически не согласиться с конфронтационным тоном доклада господина Кащунаса, касающегося конфликтов на пространстве ОБСЕ. Он не только не помогает решению, но и загоняет кризис еще глубже и глубже. Организация ОБСЕ создавалась с прямо противоположными целями. Полностью надуманной является та часть, которая посвящена Украине. Кризис в этой стране и последовавший в 2014 году государственный переворот принес и продолжает приносить украинскому народу страдания и неясность государственных ориентиров на будущее. Состоявшийся в 2014 году референдум в Крыму навсегда определил его место в качестве субъекта Российской Федерации. Должно быть понятно, что какие-либо дискуссии по этому вопросу носят пустой и бесперспективный характер. Тем более это относится к силовым провокациям в районе Крыма, на которые пошли недавно некоторые натовские страны. Отдельно нужно обсуждать циничные по сути и абсурдные по существу законы с неонацистским душком, которые принимаются сейчас на Украине, в том числе последний шедевр Киева, законопроект о коренных народах Украины. Он зашкаливает в плане попрания прав миллионов украинских граждан. Будем честны, речь идет о разобщении украинского общества. Тем самым открыт ящик Пандоры, разделив народ Украины на категории, и это на фоне насильственной украинизации представителей других национальностей. Мы с вами живем в 21 веке, и забывать об этом нельзя. Именно поэтому, поддерживая продление мандата специальной мониторинговой миссии ОБСЕ на Украине, мы призываем эту миссию внимательнейшим образом следить за формированием реакционно-националистических тенденций на всей территории этой страны, которые в значительной степени взрывоопасны для самого украинского государства, да и для всей Европы. Что касается урегулирования на юго-востоке Украины, то никакой значимой альтернативы подписанному в феврале 2015 года в Минске комплексу мер не существует. Под этим документом стоят подписи лидеров Украины, Германии, Франции и России, и он одобрен Советом Безопасности. В его основе урегулирование через налаживание прямого диалога Киева с Донбассом и проведение там выборов. Мне хотелось бы сказать, что провокационная инициатива под названием «Крымская платформа», запуск которой запланирован на август и приурочен к празднованию 30-летия независимости Украины, хочу однозначно предупредить, что мы будем рассматривать участие стран и организаций в этой затее как посягательство на территориальную целостность нашей страны. Два слова о Грузии. Результаты агрессии Николаса Саакашвили 2008 года, безусловно, сказываются. Но решать трудности надо в рамках существующих и действующих женевских дискуссий по безопасности и стабильности на Южном Кавказе. Недавно они, кстати, имели место в Женеве, где участвуют Абхазия, Грузия и Южная Осетия. Надо акцентировать внимание на диалоге, а не на взаимных обвинениях. Спасибо.
Thank you very much. Next in the list of speakers, Mr. Yusuf Basser from Turkey, please.
First of all, I'd like to thank the rapporteur for this very meticulous report. Thank you indeed. And a lot of good perspectives were put to the situation falling under our mandate, and a lot of good perspectives for the OSCE. And we absolutely reject the allegations of the Greek Cypriot administration, and we found them unfounded. There is no solution in Cyprus because the Greek Cypriots, they do not want to share the ruling and welfare with the Turkish Cypriots. And since 1968, the negotiations failed because of this mentality of the Greek Cypriots. They do not want to share. And the Greek Cypriots, they rejected the Annan plan in 2004, and they also left the table for the Crans-Montana in 2017. And Turkey and also Turkish Cypriots, they do not have another 50 years to lose. we need a fair, permanent and sustainable solution. For that, we need to focus on the realities of the island. Two people, two democracies and two states are there in the island. This is why we would like to collaborate based on communication. And in April 2021, this 5+ UN meeting in Geneva, a written proposal was made. And based on the proposal of the Turkish Cypriots, we would like the international community to recognize the equality of the Turkish Cypriots. And we are supporting the Turkish Cypriots in their proposal. If there will be a new negotiation in Cyprus, this negotiation will be happening between two states, not between two people. On the other hand, back to the migration issue, you know that Turkey has been assuming its responsibilities stemming from the 18th of March statement. And this was also mentioned by the EU High Representative, Mr. Borrell, in his report. He said that the migration to the European Union has stopped thanks to the efforts of Turkey. So blaming Turkey about this will be unfounded and unfair. And our expectation from the international community and the members will be not to blame Turkey, but also share responsibilities with Turkey. And as to the claims of the Armenian colleague of ours, I believe that this is an impact of the defamation campaign of the Armenia. We reject the claims and allegations of Armenia, and we found them unfounded. We want sustainable peace in the South Caucasia, and this can only be done through territorial and regional collaboration. And Turkey has a very constructive vision for the future of the South Caucasia. We mentioned this in numerous times, but unfortunately our statements fall on the deaf ears. And as to the prisoners of war, during the conflict and just after the conflict, those prisoners of war were transferred back. They were exchanged through the Red Cross. And the ones who are detained at the moment, they are the members of sabotage. They are the people detained weeks and months after the conflict. And there is this trial to be held for those people. And the International Red Cross has access to those people, I need to mention. And also, Nagorno-Karabakh conflict was about the occupation of Armenia. Now Azerbaijan took back their territory and they achieved their territorial integrity. So there is no conflict over there. There is no protracted crisis over there. If we insist on protracted crisis statement, then we cannot achieve a permanent peace over there. This is why we invite Armenia to see the realities, and we invite Armenia not to politicize OSCE EPA in every potential opportunity. Concluding my remarks, I'd like to greet you all and welcome you all once again. Thank you very much. Have a nice meeting.
Thank you very much. Next in the list of speakers, Mr. Alimov from Uzbekistan, please.
Спасибо, уважаемый господин председатель, уважаемые коллеги. Приветствую также уважаемых парламентариев нашей летней сессии. Действительно, мы живем в непростой период новых вызовов, которые связаны с вооруженными конфликтами, экономическими кризисами, природными, техногенными катастрофами, а также вот пандемией. Именно поэтому универсальный характер ОБСЕ, рассматривающий вопросы безопасности в гораздо более широком контексте, сегодня как никогда приобретает значительную актуальность. Наличие противоречий между государствами актуализирует вопрос поиска новых путей сотрудничества, в том числе по линии парламентской дипломатии. 1,5 года пандемии коронавируса показали ключевую важность укрепления институтов национального государства, а также то, что дефицит общественного доверия, неэффективность деятельности органов власти, отсутствие транспарентности и интерактивной связи с гражданским обществом делает наши страны еще более уязвимыми. В Узбекистане за последние 4 года проводятся масштабные коренные реформы во всех сферах жизни общества. Центральный принцип преобразований – это тезис «не народ должен служить государству, а государство народу». Отмечается в Узбекистане сегодня неуклонный рост роли парламента в принятии политических решений, реформ, проводимых в государстве. Кардинально усилился парламентский контроль за деятельностью органов государственной власти, особенно в части, касающейся прав человека. К примеру, была ликвидирована практика черных списков, закрыта колония Джаслыке, прекращена практика детского и принудительного труда, обеспечена свобода слова, разблокирован целый ряд ранее запрещенных веб-сайтов и так далее. С целью обеспечения прозрачности деятельности органов государственной власти 25 июня было принято решение о создании Сената Узбекистана Комитета по вопросам информационной политики и обеспечения открытости в государственных органах. В результате коренной модернизации системы государственного управления в Узбекистане общество стало более открытым, а правительство еще более подотчетным гражданам страны. Уважаемые коллеги, реформы в Узбекистане приобретают необратимый характер и будут продолжены. Предстоящие в октябре текущего года выборы президента Узбекистана, на которых мы, как мы надеемся, миссия парламентской ассамблеи ОБСЕ примет самое активное участие, еще раз продемонстрирует стремление республики всесторонне укреплять гражданское общество и демократические институты. Уважаемые дамы и господа, в докладе господина Кашинца отмечена важность укрепления глобального сотрудничества. В данном контексте хотелось бы отметить, что его тезисы созвучны инициативам президента Узбекистана, господина Мирзияева, который выдвинутым 23 сентября в рамках 75-й сессии Генеральной Ассамблеи ООН. Глава нашего государства предложил разработать Международный кодекс о добровольных обязательствах государств в период пандемии, а также принять специальную резолюцию Генассамблеи ООН о повышении роли парламентов в достижении цели устойчивого развития в обеспечении прав человека. 23-24 июня, как вы знаете, в городе Бухаре состоялся первый в своем роде международный форум «Глобальное межпарламентское сотрудничество в достижении цели устойчивого развития», в котором приняли также участие представители парламентской ассамблеи ОБСЕ. Уважаемые коллеги, в представленном докладе также был сделан важный акцент на возрастающие трансграничные угрозы. Как вам известно, Узбекистан непосредственно граничит с Афганистаном, где в последнее время отмечается рост насилия и эскалации напряженности. И все эти условия новой волны пандемии коронавируса. Эти события еще раз демонстрируют необходимость повышения роли ОБСЕ в вопросах скорейшего разрешения конфликта в этой многострадальной стране. В этой связи хотел бы призвать уважаемых парламентариев поддержать инициативу Узбекистана по созданию при ООН постоянно действующего комитета по Афганистану, который будет вносить существенный вклад в установление мира и стабильности в этой стране, содействие ее социально-экономическому развитию, обеспечение мирной и благополучной жизни людей. Благодарю вас за внимание.
Thank you very much. Next in the speakers list, Monsieur Jean-Guy Dagenet du Canada. Vous avez la parole.
Alors, merci, Monsieur le Président. Je remercie mes collègues pour leur intervention. Je suis particulièrement reconnaissant envers Monsieur Kasuma pour son rapport. Pour ma part, je souhaiterais partager ma perspective à propos du commerce des armes, plus particulièrement la récente mise en œuvre par le Canada de règles adoptées pour donner suite à la ratification du traité sur le commerce des armes. Le traité reconnaît le droit naturel à la légitime défense des États. Il reconnaît également l'intérêt légitime de tout État d'acquérir des armes classiques pour exercer son droit légitime de défense, de même que celui de produire et faire le commerce de ces armes. Cependant, la reconnaissance des droits et des intérêts des États en matière d'acquisition, de production et de commerce d'armes classiques comporte également l'obligation de réglementer le commerce international de ces armes pour prévenir qu'elles soient utilisées à mauvais escient. Le traité requiert donc que ces États membres instituent des normes communes pour réglementer le commerce international d'armes classiques, ainsi que pour prévenir et éliminer le commerce illicite de ces armes, de façon à renforcer la sécurité des États et réduire la souffrance humaine. Le Canada a fait son propre examen de conscience. Depuis 2019, sa législation exige que le gouvernement refuse tout permis d'exploitation lorsqu'il y a un risque sérieux que des marchandises ou des technologies militaires entraînent une des conséquences négatives énumérées au traité. De telles conséquences comprennent l'atteinte à la paix et à la sécurité, ainsi que de graves violations des droits de la personne. La législation vise ainsi à assurer que les marchandises ou technologies militaires en provenance du Canada servent uniquement à des fins de défense et de sécurité. Pour ce faire, les demandes de licence d'exportation pour ces produits sont examinées au cas par cas. En vertu de cette nouvelle législation, le Canada, en 2020, a suspendu des licences d'exportation, entre autres à la Turquie. Leur suspension faisait suite à des allégations selon lesquelles une technologie canadienne installée sur des drones turcs était utilisée par les forces armées de l'Azerbaïdjan au Haut-Karabakh. En avril 2021, après avoir trouvé des preuves crédibles appuyant ces allégations, notre ministre des Affaires étrangères a annulé ces licences. Il a précisé que l'utilisation de la technologie canadienne dans le territoire contesté du Haut-Karabakh n'était pas conforme à la politique étrangère du Canada aux garanties d'utilisation finale fournies par la Turquie. Évidemment, je souhaite souligner des éléments importants. D'abord, le rôle des parlementaires. Leur travail a mené à la promulgation en 2018 d'une législation s'appliquant au plus large éventail de marchandises et technologies militaires que les armes classiques énumérées au traité. Également important, avec l'aide essentielle des médias d'information, les parlementaires canadiens ont joué un rôle crucial en attirant l'attention du public et du gouvernement sur l'utilisation d'une technologie militaire canadienne au Haut-Karabakh en exigeant des réponses et des actions rapides de la part des autorités canadiennes. Le second élément est la nécessité d'encourager tous les États participants de l'OSCE à signer et à ratifier le TCA, en particulier les plus grands producteurs d'armes tels que les États-Unis et la Russie. Leur pleine participation est essentielle pour assurer que les armes servent à préserver la paix et la sécurité plutôt que de les mettre en péril. Merci.
Thank you very much. Next in the list, doña María Teresa Jiménez Becerril de España. Tiene usted la palabra.
¿Ya? ¿Se me oye? ¿Sí?
Perfectamente, María Teresa, adelante.
Vale, pues muchísimas gracias. Quería saludar a todos los presentes. Como diputada del Reino de España, quiero felicitar al ponente Kashunas por este informe, por su claridad y por ser una sacudida a las conciencias de los miembros de la OSCE, ya que es fundamental y es algo que yo comparto totalmente, la necesidad de fortalecer nuestras decisiones, hacerlo con firmeza y sobre todo con unidad. La credibilidad de esta organización está en juego y si se siguen violando los derechos humanos en Georgia, en Ucrania, como estamos viendo, y no se cumplen los pactos y el derecho internacional es pisoteado por los imperialistas de siempre, pues se verá que nuestro trabajo no está teniendo el éxito que debería tener. Como parlamentarios tenemos la responsabilidad, tenemos que estar comprometidos con la democracia, el derecho internacional, porque la seguridad no puede ser esclava del poder. También necesitamos impulsar el multilateralismo y lo tenemos que hacer más que nunca ahora en tiempos de COVID, donde la opacidad está favoreciendo a quienes realmente no quieren destruir nuestra democracia. Y como digo, el multilateralismo va mimado y tenemos que cuidarlo frente a los nacionalismos. Y no hablo solamente del nacionalismo de Estado, sino los nacionalismos dentro del Estado que están creciendo y provocando tensiones, desigualdades y faltas de libertad. Existen también en países europeos, como en mi país, España, lo hemos visto en el País Vasco, con 50 años de terrorismo de ETA, cientos de víctimas, y lo estamos viendo sin violencia o con una violencia, digamos, menor, no comparable, ni mucho menos, pero hemos visto también en Cataluña tensiones y una división que no nos favorece. Por lo tanto, creo que es muy importante que nos unamos y unirnos más que estar desunidos. También quiero felicitar, porque soy parte del Comité del Terrorismo dentro de la OSCE, y quiero felicitar a su presidente, el señor Lopatka, por su trabajo y a todos los miembros, y me preocupa el avance del ciberterrorismo, porque los terroristas no han parado, simplemente han cogido otra estrategia y no podemos bajar la guardia. Y realmente quiero felicitar a la OSCE y por este comité por su enorme defensa, su colaboración con la UNDOC, con Naciones Unidas, en la protección y en la defensa de los derechos de las víctimas del terrorismo. Yo, como víctima del terrorismo de la organización terrorista ETA, sé bien lo que es y verdaderamente la OSCE puede estar orgullosa de su comité. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, señora Jiménez Becerril. Next in our list of speakers is Mr. Leonid Slutsky from the Russian Federation, please.
Большое спасибо, Густаво. Надеюсь, меня хорошо видно и слышно. Всем большой привет из Государственной Думы, из Москвы. К сожалению, слушая доклад нашего коллеги Кащунаса, я ощутил нас в некой машине времени, но в машине времени такой, которая стоит на месте, в то время как реальность двигается вперед. Я не услышал в докладе господина Кащунаса и последующих выступлениях ничего абсолютно нового. Совершенно ничего. И более того, все претензии, которые звучали сегодня, мы слышали на наших заседаниях уже не два, не три, а более много раз. Должен сказать, что серьезные, уважающие себя страны, и в том числе Российская Федерация, никогда не позволит разговаривать с собой на основе ультиматумов. Россия будет добиваться только равноправного диалога, и в том числе на площадке ОБСЕ и нашей парламентской ассамблеи, для рассмотрения любых вопросов. Что касается нас, Российской Федерации, коллеги, давно пора понять, что под надеждами на игру с нами в одни ворота окончательно подведена черта. Все попытки нормализовать якобы отношения с Россией, если Россия будет каяться, изменит свое поведение, давно утратили смысл. И то, что многие коллеги продолжают, в том числе в нашей ассамблее, по инерции выдвигать нам односторонние требования, на основании ситуации ничего общего и подходов, ничего общего не имеющих с реальностью, не делает чести способности, прошу прощения, адекватно оценивать происходящее. Я хочу ответить господину Кащунасу и особенно господину Роджеру Икеру, что Крым вернулся в Российскую Федерацию на основе норм и принципов Устава Организации Объединенных Наций. Я хочу сказать уважаемым коллегам, которые здесь выступали по юго-востоку Украины, что там не было и нет никакого вооружения, происходящего из России, что 8 раз отмечено в докладах смешанной мониторинговой миссии ОБСЕ. Если мы работаем в парламентской ассамблее ОБСЕ, давайте читать доклады смешанной мониторинговой миссии. Что касается Абхазии и Южной Осетии, то они появились на политической карте мира, опять же, в соответствии с нормами и принципами Устава ООН, а также ввиду тех центробежных тенденций, которые были заведены официальным Тбилиси. Коллеги, я предложил бы нам вернуться к реалиям. Давайте проведем семинары по стратегической стабильности, по кибербезопасности, наконец, по противодействию пандемии COVID-19. И это будет соответствовать и вызовам сегодняшнего дня, и высокому статусу нашей парламентской ассамблеи. Давайте заниматься делом. Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much. Next in the list of speakers, Monsieur Guy Teissier de France. Vous avez la parole, monsieur. Monsieur Teissier, vous êtes là? Okay, meanwhile, we solve the connection issue with Mr. Teissier. We move to the next speaker on the list is Ms. Aygul Kushpan, Kazakhstan, please.
Уважаемые коллеги, дамы и господа,
Процесс утраты взаимного доверия на пространстве ОБСЕ нарастает, сопровождаясь, к сожалению, эскалацией напряженности и драматическими разногласиями между государствами. Мир подвис в состоянии опасной неопределенности, связанной с ростом терроризма. И это происходит на фоне ослабления глобальной безопасности. С сожалением отмечаю, что молодые люди, вне зависимости от их национальности, религии, пола и географии проживания, становятся жертвами деструктивной экстремистской идеологии, а часть из них вовлекается в незаконную деятельность в различных горячих точках планеты. В этом контексте Казахстан не стал исключением. Некоторые наши граждане выезжали в Сирию и Ирак, где участвовали в боевых действиях на стороне террористических групп. В последние 2 года мы провели большую работу, чтобы вернуть наших детей и женщин из зон конфликта. Для них в Казахстане создано 17 реабилитационных центров по оказанию психологической и иной помощи. Мы считаем, что наш опыт представляет большой интерес и большую ценность, и мы готовы делиться своим опытом. Так недавно, в апреле этого года, мы провели специальный брифинг на тему «Судебное преследование, реабилитация и реинтеграция иностранных боевиков-террористов. Опыт Казахстана». На этом мероприятии мы представили результаты гуманитарных операций под названием «Жусан» и «Русафа». Это операции по возвращению на родину более 700 казахстанских граждан, большинство из которых – женщины и совсем маленькие дети. Угрозы экстремизма и терроризма диктуют необходимость более эффективной консолидации усилий всего мирового сообщества, включая страны-участницы ОБСЕ. В данном контексте хотела бы напомнить, что еще в 2015 году первый президент Казахстана Нурсултан Назарбаев, выступая на 70-й сессии Генеральной Ассамблеи ООН, выдвинул инициативу формирования глобальной коалиции по борьбе с терроризмом. Тогда его поддержало 89 государств. В продолжение миротворческой деятельности и с учетом апрельского конфликта на кыргызско-таджикской границе президент Казахстана Касым-Жомарт Токаев выдвинул предложение выработать механизм урегулирования пограничных инцидентов в рамках очередной консультативной встречи глав государств Центральной Азии. Примечательно, что казахстанский миротворческий батальон Казбат, основанный более 15 лет назад, является первым и единственным на сегодняшний день миротворческим подразделением в Средней Азии. 2 слова в качестве комментария к докладу господина Лауренаса Кащунаса. В докладе Нагорный Карабах по-прежнему отнесен к замороженным конфликтам. Я считаю, что мы, напротив, должны поздравить друг друга с прекращением военных действий в зоне конфликта, которое было достигнуто благодаря трехстороннему соглашению между Азербайджаном, Арменией и Россией. Действительно, с восстановлением территориальной целостности Азербайджана в соответствии с резолюциями Организации Объединенных Наций открылись беспрецедентные перспективы для установления долгосрочного мира и экономического процветания для всех стран региона, прежде всего для Армении, через налаживание коммуникационных маршрутов. Поэтому я думаю, что можно смело Нагорный Карабах исключать из категории замороженных конфликтов, и все мировое сообщество должно способствовать закреплению достигнутого мира. И второе, я хотела бы поддержать нашего узбекского коллегу, господина Раушана Алимова, о том, что необходимо создать в ООН постоянный комитет по Афганистану. Это очень ценное предложение. Казахстан в ходе своего непостоянного членства в Совете Безопасности ООН возглавлял непостоянный комитет по Афганистану, и мы подтверждаем необходимость создания постоянного комитета. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much. We now try again, Monsieur Guy Teissier de France. Vous avez la parole, monsieur. I'm afraid we don't hear you, sir. I think the connection is not working. I think we're going to move to the next speaker on the list, and then we will try to come back and see if the problem is solved. Next, the list is Mr. Joe Wilson from the USA, please.
Thank you, Gustavo, and honored colleagues. I am grateful for the opportunity to participate today with special recognition to Chairman Richard Hudson, who's my next door neighbor from North Carolina, and our other committee officers for their work in convening today's meeting. As we meet, I want to particularly pay tribute to the late Chairman Alcee Hastings, who was devoted to his service with OSCE and so appreciative of everyone who worked for the principles of the Helsinki Final Act. Thank you to Mr. Laurenis Kasčiūnas of Lithuania for composing this report. I was particularly heartened to see so much attention paid to the sad situation for the citizens of Belarus, and would like to focus my remarks on that country. It's also important in that report, the citing of the illegal occupation of Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova by the Russian Federation, but it should also be noted there have been over 11,000 deaths. Some may believe that what is happening in Belarus today, that is a dangerous dictator trampling on the human rights of anyone he perceives to be a political threat, is not necessarily a First Committee issue. But as we understand from the Helsinki Final Act and the brave souls who strive to hold governments accountable for their commitments under the Act, security is comprehensive, and human rights crises in one country can affect security of all countries. We saw this sadly so clearly in the appalling state-sponsored hijacking of a Ryanair commercial jet. Because the plane was carrying Roman Prasevich, an activist and journalist who had fled Belarus on his own safety, the pilots were notified of a false bomb threat met by a Belarusian military jet and forced to land in Minsk. Roman and his girlfriend were detained and remained in Belarus, arrested as victims of state-sponsored hostage-taking. The point of such an internal human rights crisis becomes an international security issue is rarely so clear-cut. A flight between two EU countries filled with passengers from numerous countries was held hostage in Belarus on the whim of an illegitimate dictator who will clearly do anything to eliminate his opposition, even committing an act of air piracy and kidnapping. International sanctions and bans on flight over Belarusian airspace have been a welcome response, but I agree with Mr. Kasčiūnas that accountability for the perpetrators, who I hope will be forthcoming after the current international investigation, is necessary to prevent another incident like this, whether it be in Belarus or anywhere in the world. It was also cited in the report, we must not forget there are still hundreds of political prisoners in Belarus today, and the number is only growing. These people must be released unconditionally from prisons and house arrest and any other restrictions on their freedom. I repeat, this is just not a Belarusian issue, but that one that goes to the heart of OSCE. Without political opposition to challenge the status quo and without a plurality of views in forming policy, that is to say, without respect for the fundamental freedoms enshrined in the Helsinki Final Act and elsewhere, a state becomes insular, isolated, and dangerous. Belarus under Lukashenko has become such a state, it's imperative we must not enable this behavior, and for the safety and security, beginning for the people of Belarus. I conclude with appreciation for participating, and I look forward to working with colleagues promoting equal opportunities for all citizens to succeed in freedom. We should also remain united in the global war on terrorism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Next, the list, Monsieur Luc Berthold de Canada. Vous avez la parole, monsieur.
Merci beaucoup. Je remercie mes collègues pour leurs interventions. Je suis particulièrement reconnaissant envers M. Kasčiūnas pour son rapport. Pour ma part, j'aimerais aborder la question de la répression au Bélarus. Il y a seulement 4 ans, je participais avec certains d'entre vous à la séance annuelle de l'Association parlementaire de l'OSCE à Minsk. Le Bélarus nous avait bien reçus. On avait tous souligné l'importance des institutions démocratiques et de la pleine participation de la société civile dans ces institutions. Vous vous souviendrez que la déclaration adoptée à l'époque encourageait tous les États participants à renforcer la confiance dans la fiabilité des processus électoraux et le fonctionnement des institutions démocratiques. On leur y demandait également de mettre fin au harcèlement, à l'emprisonnement, au mauvais traitement et aux disparitions d'opposants politiques, de défenseurs des droits de la personne, de journalistes et d'autres membres de la société civile. Or, que reste-t-il de l'esprit de Minsk de 2017 dans le Bélarus d'aujourd'hui? Les autorités bélarusiennes s'engageaient à préserver et à renforcer la démocratie au Bélarus et ailleurs en Europe. Or, il est évident aujourd'hui qu'elles lui ont tourné le dos. Tel qu'exprimé par son ministère des Affaires étrangères, le gouvernement du Canada considère que les élections présidentielles d'août 2020 étaient frauduleuses. Par conséquent, Alexandre Loukachenko n'a pas la légitimité pour diriger le Bélarus. Une enquête lancée par les États participants de l'OSCE et menée par des experts indépendants a révélé que des violations massives et systémiques des droits de la personne ont eu lieu avant et après les élections présidentielles. Ce même rapport d'enquête exhortait le Bélarus à tenir de nouvelles élections, à libérer tous les prisonniers politiques et à traduire en justice les personnes responsables d'actes de torture et d'autres types de mauvais traitements. La détention de Roman Protasevich et de Sofia Sapega, extrêmement choquante en soi, est la pointe de l'iceberg d'une dure répression des médias. Reporters sans frontières a d'ailleurs désigné le Bélarus comme le pays européen où il est le plus dangereux d'exercer la profession de journaliste. En tant qu'ancien journaliste moi-même, je peux vous dire que ce n'est pas une place que l'on souhaite occuper quand on est parlementaire d'un pays. Le Canada est solidaire avec le peuple du Bélarus. Avec le Royaume-Uni, le Canada était le premier pays à adopter des sanctions liées à la situation. Son gouvernement a sanctionné 72 individus et 5 entités bélarusses pour les violations des droits de l'homme et le détournement du vol de Ryanair. En terminant, en tant que parlementaire, j'aime bien pouvoir avoir l'occasion de participer dans ces différents pays, dans les rencontres internationales de l'OSCE-PA. Cependant, quand seulement quelques années plus tard, on se rend compte que tous les beaux principes, toutes les belles discussions, toutes les belles rencontres qu'on a eu l'occasion d'avoir donnent absolument rien. On est en droit de se questionner du pouvoir de nous, parlementaires, pour faire changer les choses. Et surtout, on doit prendre conscience qu'on ne doit pas être utilisé uniquement pour faire avancer l'agenda politique de certains politiciens. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Next is Ms. Grigorian from Armenia, please.
Am I heard well? Sorry?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, Gustavo, and thank you, Mr. Laurinas Kashiunas, for your insightful report. Also, Jean-Guy, the delegate of Canada, for mentioning the aggression by Azerbaijan towards the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, and Canada's firm commitment for human rights and democracy. Among the many crucial aspects raised in the report, I want to start with emphasizing the importance of democracy. Armenia recently held free, fair, and transparent elections, and I'm proud to say that we could defend our democracy in such a difficult time, considering the consequences of the horrible 44-day war. The role of democracy cannot be overestimated when talking about security, stability, and peace. What we observe, and moreover, many of us have to live through, is suffering due to authoritarian countries surrounding us, some of us just neighboring us. Today, Azay Guliev is speaking about the OSCE Minsk group, saying he's unhappy with the work of the group. Maybe it is also the time that Azerbaijan admits that being unhappy with the negotiations as a tool to resolve conflicts, as democracies would usually do, it decided to violate all possible international laws, the Helsinki Final Act, and just attacked Nagorno-Karabakh in a well-planned military aggression. Now, Azay Guliev is making a statement asking to replace Nagorno-Karabakh with a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan in the report. This is, in fact, the biggest mistake of Azerbaijan, thinking that it is ever possible to persuade the world that the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is about territories and not about people, is about a territorial issue, and while the conflict, in fact, is about self-determination. And here is where, dear colleagues, We all have to put our efforts in, help Azerbaijan finally understand that the conflict is not over exactly for the reason that it is not about unleashing inhumane war with drones on people and then saying, let's have peace, but about a political process respecting the self-determination right of the people living in Nagorno-Karabakh. I have to disappoint Azay Guliyev and Ms. Aygul Kuspan from Kazakhstan. The OSCE Minsk Group is the only internationally recognized format for resolving the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and the group has multiple times stated that the conflict needs to be over only through peaceful negotiations and a political solution, which is reflected in the current report. So once again, thank you for the report, Mr. Kashiunas, and thank you, dear colleagues, for your attention and cooperation.
Thank you very much. Next in the speakers list is Mr. Nestor Šufrić from Ukraine, please.
Приветствую, господин председатель. Рад видеть всех наших коллег. Отдельно хотел бы поприветствовать господина Роджера Викера, нашего председателя и сегодняшнего вице-президента Парламентской ассамблеи ОБСЕ. Безусловно, доклад, который мы сегодня слышали, заслуживает очень глубокого анализа и обсуждения. Конечно, один из основных вопросов, который меня беспокоит как представителя Украины, это реализация Минских соглашений. Хотел бы отметить, что сегодня эта ситуация, именно сегодня, находится довольно в тупиковой ситуации, а именно из-за того, что, как было определено в том числе и во время апрельского визита президента Украины во Францию господину Макрону, где имела место видеоконференция с госпожой Меркель, было итоговое обращение французской и германской стороны, где они впервые обратились не только к российской, но и украинской стороне с призывом реализовать Минские соглашения. Ведь по-разному можно оценивать роль России, которая не снимает свое влияние в этом вопросе, не отрицает его, но законы, которые предусмотрены Минскими соглашениями, должны быть приняты не в Конгрессе США, не в парламенте Франции, не в Бундестаге, а именно в Верховной Раде, то есть в парламенте Украины. При этом я бы хотел обратить внимание, что сегодня сторонники реализации Минских соглашений подвергаются репрессиям. Арестован лидер партии ОПЗЖ, один из основателей организации переговоров в рамках трехсторонней контактной группы и член украинской делегации в контактной группе в недавнем прошлом Виктор Медведчук, он сегодня находится под арестом. Также 3 оппозиционных канала были закрыты в незаконный способ, как это уже определили и уполномоченные на это представители Организации Объединенных Наций и, собственно, ОБСЕ, а также 4-й канал, первый независимый, который был закрыт уже росчерком Службы безопасности Украины. Вчера произошло еще одно очень настораживающее событие. Был принят закон о коренных народах Украины. Среди них названы крымские татары, крымчаки и те, которые проживают на территории Крыма, но об этом забыты такие народы, как венгры, румыны, словаки, болгары, гагаузы и, конечно же, русские, которые 1000 и даже 2500 лет, например, как румыны, проживают на территории современной Украины. И такая дискриминация сегодня вызывает беспокойство со стороны всех наших соседей. Сегодня также мы обеспокоены тем, что в Украине стали приветствоваться поддержка отдельных организаций, которые осуждены Нюрнбергским процессом. Беспрецедентное шествие в поддержку дивизии СС «Галичина» вызвало широкий негативный резонанс и реакцию в передовых странах Европы и мира. При этом не могу не вспомнить и не отметить позицию своего коллеги, господина Потураева, который еще недавно в Верховной Раде с трибуны призывал расправиться со своими политическими оппонентами и призывал расстрелять их, ни больше, ни меньше. И все это на фоне фактического сегодня приветствия и поддержки отдельных профашистских идеологий и лозунгов. Все это вызывает сегодня обеспокоенность. Я как человек, который 20 лет, 6 раз избирался в Верховную Раду Украины, был дважды членом Кабинета министров Украины, еще такой нетерпимости и преследования основных демократических принципов, блокировки работы Конституционного суда не видел. Это вызывает у меня глубокое обеспокоенность, и я надеюсь, что встреча с госпожой Меркель и с господином Байденом все-таки поможет нам восстановить принципы демократии, и хочу выразить надежду, что возможное присоединение американской стороны к урегулированию конфликта на Донбассе даст свои результаты. А мы должны объединиться вокруг главного – сохранения жизни украинцев и достижения стабильности на Донбассе, что является основой стабильности в европейском регионе ОБСЕ. Спасибо всем за внимание.
Thank you very much. Now we have a small alteration on the list of speakers. We're going to try now and connect with the U.S. delegation, Congresswoman Jackson Lee. You have the floor, please. Congresswoman, are you connected? Can you hear us? Doesn't seem to be the case. So then we're going to try again. We had Mr. Guy Teissier from France. Monsieur Teissier, s'il vous plaît.
Allô? Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Perfectly.
Oui?
Please go ahead.
OK. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je tenais à remercier le remarquable travail de notre rapporteur qui, dans la longue liste des conflits dans notre espace, a voulu mentionner le conflit de Haut-Karabakh. Je voudrais rappeler à la précédente oratrice qui avait l'air de dire que cette affaire était classée maintenant, qu'il fallait passer à autre chose. Ce n'est pas ça du tout. En réalité, il y a eu un accord tripartite scellé par l'Arménie et l'Azerbaïdjan sous l'égide de la Russie, qui est simplement un accord de cessez-le-feu et qui n'est en rien un accord de paix. Et d'ailleurs, cette paix est bafouée en permanence par les occupants azerbaïdjanais qui continuent à faire des incursions, à terroriser les populations, voire à capturer des soldats arméniens, n'hésitant pas de rentrer même sur le territoire arménien hors du Haut-Karabakh. Donc, dans votre rapport, vous mentionnez le fait que la délimitation et la démarcation des frontières doivent être établies par voie de négociation et par des moyens exclusivement pacifiques, sans l'intervention de l'armée. Et je dois vous dire que je partage absolument votre point de vue. Mais il faut donc rappeler ce que ce petit territoire du Haut-Karabakh a connu pendant les 40 jours d'une guerre extrêmement intensive et meurtrière. Donc, malgré les tentatives de médiation de l'intermédiaire du groupe de Minsk, seul un cessez-le-feu aujourd'hui est en vigueur. Récemment encore, je voudrais rappeler que 6 soldats arméniens ont été capturés par les forces azerbaïdjanaises à la frontière de l'Arménie. Ce conflit étant plus exacerbé par les velléités expansionnistes et les opérations d'influence qui sont menées par la Turquie. Depuis le cessez-le-feu, donc cette population placée sous occupation vit des provocations quasi quotidiennes. Cet acharnement et la violation complète du droit international est pourtant connu et reconnu de la communauté internationale, et même le président azerbaïdjanais avait déclaré, souvenez-vous, j'avais dit qu'on chasserait les Arméniens comme des chiens, nous l'avons fait. Les enjeux sécuritaires et diplomatiques sont évidents. Le déclenchement d'un nouveau conflit dans le Caucase aux portes du Moyen-Orient sont déjà déchirés par les confrontations régionales. les belligérances turques que nous éprouvons au cœur même de l'Europe, dans les eaux territoriales grecques ou en Chypre, cela a été déjà mentionné par d'autres orateurs, ou encore la présence de mercenaires djihadistes. Mais le conflit de Haut-Karabakh nous dépasse également en ce qu'il remet en question les fondements même de notre démocratie. Et donc, je pense qu'il n'apparaît qu'une véritable seule, comment pourrais-je dire, qu'une seule solution de reconnaître la pleine souveraineté du Haut-Karabakh, c'est en fait la reconnaissance de ce territoire, effectivement, après un accord dans le cadre du cessez-le-feu entre les belligérants. C'est la seule manière, me semble-t-il, de relancer le processus de paix et d'assurer la sécurité à laquelle les populations arméniennes ont légitimement droit. Le groupe de Minsk reste une instance de dialogue privilégiée, mais il est essentiel que les autorités élues d'Artsakh, me semble-t-il, en fassent partie. Depuis toujours, je me bats pour la protection du peuple arménien et ce combat n'a pas été vain. Le Parlement français a adopté fin 2020 2 résolutions, dont une à mon initiative relative à la reconnaissance de la République du Haut-Karabakh. Aujourd'hui encore, en mon nom, je vous demande de vous engager dans cette voie et d'offrir votre soutien à la protection des libertés fondamentales. Je vous demande de condamner cette tragédie qui n'a pas sa place au sein de notre organisation et de reconnaître la République d'Artsakh. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. We try again with the U.S. Delegation, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. If you are connected, please, you have the floor. It does not seem to be the case, so we'll move on to our next speaker in the list, and this is Mr. Mike Wood from the United Kingdom. Mr. Wood, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I congratulate the rapporteur on an excellent and comprehensive report to this committee. As Mr. Kashunas writes, and as Congressman Wilson so rightly said, this organisation and the security of the region that it covers is based upon a multinational framework. However, that framework and our collective security and stability are fundamentally undermined when countries choose conflict and unilateralism over harmony, respect, and cooperation. Each of us is less secure if member states annex, occupy, or control the territories of other member states. All of our freedoms are restricted if governments feel able to divert and ground civilian flights on false premises in order to pursue campaigns against political opponents. And none of us can be safe when officials acting on behalf of other member states' governments seek to murder their enemies on our streets, as my own country experienced with the poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko and Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. And Mr. Slutsky spoke about in this debate about it feeling like a time machine. Sadly, he's correct, but that is because too many of the actions of President Putin's government feel like relics from an age that many of us hoped had been left behind 30 years ago. Such behaviour may not have been uncommon during the Cold War and was by no means confined to any one side, but it cannot be acceptable in the 21st century. There will be many who question whether such behaviour is compatible with membership of a multinational organisation like the OSCE, but I recognise the benefits of engagement where that is possible, working together as genuine, if sometimes critical friends. We do not wish for confrontation. Another relationship is possible and it is available, a relationship based on peace, respect and cooperation that is in our mutual interest. However, that does mean that governments like that of the Russian Federation must choose a different path to the one they are currently on, to choose multilateralism and compliance, to choose democratic values, and to choose to work effectively alongside rather than in opposition to its neighbours.
Thank you very much. Before we continue, let me announce on behalf of the chair that the list of speakers is now closed. The chair, however, will allow those members that have already intervened, if they wish to take the floor again, to do so for 1 minute. We will do that once we conclude the list of speakers. So please sign in the chat if you wish to have a second intervention. It will be for 1 minute. We continue now. We go back to the US. We try again with Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee from the US delegation. If you are connected, you have the floor, please.
Good morning. Thank you so very much. I thank you for this intervention, and I thank you for the focus. Chairman Hudson, thank you. Thank you to the Reflector for this intervention that really focuses on the necessity for multilateralism. We cannot be united in our commitment to democracy if we are not united in the offenses of democracy. It's been 7 years since Russia annexed Crimea, as well as a number of other intrusions, such as the cyber attacks in Georgia and the United States, with those who are harbored by the Russian Federation. I think it is important that, as President Biden has emphasized, that we continue to say unilaterally and united, that is unacceptable international behavior. It is such because it causes massive economic loss and ultimately loss of lives. In the colonial pipeline, there was tragic responses in terms of desperately needed energy resources in parts of the United States. We are resilient and committed to address those questions. At the same time, as a member of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, I intertwine human rights with our political status. And so it is important that when its neighbor, Belarus, decides to ground a plane to deny a dissident his rights, then that is an unacceptable position. I've introduced cybersecurity legislation to prepare us for what we call zero-day events. I think in the political realm, that cyber is a very excellent point of multilateralism to ensure that we have and speak with the same voice on protecting our cyber infrastructure. Yesterday, the United States made its first step in passing the INVEST Act. We are committed to rebuilding our infrastructure. I can say in light of the pandemic, all of our nations need to look internally at how we rebuild infrastructure and boost our economic engine. Finally, I would offer to say that political involvement is never far from human rights, as I indicated. We have been studying the conflicts in Liberia, the questions and challenges in the Northern Triangle in Central America. And it is important that the OSCE looks at conflicts that may not be directly within our sphere, but impact our nation states. I think the gift that we have is to be able to promote democracy in places where it is most difficult or foreign to them. That should be the commitment. Finally, as I said earlier in a presentation, reparations, repairing damage is important. And I carry legislation here in the United States, H.R. 40, the Commission to Study Slavery and Develop Reparation Proposals. The concept of it is that where there is a harm, we must repair. The OSCE can be very much engaged in repairing harm where it has occurred. Thank you, and I look forward to continuing to collaborate on these very important issues.
Thank you very much. Next in the list of speakers, Ms. Ulviya Agayeva from Azerbaijan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dear colleagues, and I would also like to thank the rapporteur for this report. Once we touch upon this topic, I'd like also to express a few thoughts on this. As you know, Azerbaijani territories have been under Armenian occupation for more than a quarter of a century. Since the early 90s, consistent measures have been undertaken by the Republic of Armenia in order to illegally change demographic picture, destruct and dismantle the infrastructure, and many other acts of vandalism against cultural property and heritage in formerly occupied territories. With a deep regret, I have to say that formerly occupied territories is quite shocking. deliberate destruction and embezzlement of Azerbaijan historical and cultural heritage, misappropriation as well as changing architectural features of the town, clearly demonstrated the goal of removing any signs heralding their Azerbaijani origins. Another example of deep hatred and animosity is Azerbaijan's war-torn Aghdam region, which was razed to the ground. You can easily Google it and see the difference before occupation and after occupation. Some international journalists even refer to Aghdam city as the Hiroshima of the 21st century. More than 400 monuments representing the cultural and religious heritage of Azerbaijan have been destroyed by Armenia in the once occupied Karabakh region. They turned the mosque, a holy place for Muslims in the Karabakh region, into a barn for pigs and cattle during the years of occupation. On numerous occasions, we drew attention of international community to Armenia's practices and policies in the formerly occupied territories of Azerbaijan, that it contradicts the norms and principles of international law. Azerbaijan's response to these senseless acts of vandalism was that all religious heritage and monuments in our liberated territories, regardless of their origin, will be protected and restored to a high level. Our country has been able to establish itself as a country of tolerance and peaceful coexistence of different cultures, ethnicities, and religions, which was praised by Pope Francis as a model for the world. Azerbaijan proved itself as a true promoter of these ideas, not by words, but by concrete actions and initiatives like Baku Process and many others. Azerbaijan will continue to build upon these achievements and will guarantee all the rights for all its citizens, irrespective of their ethnic or religious affiliation, including their cultural rights. At the end, just a few sentences regarding the speech of our Armenian colleague. Once again, I'd like to reiterate that the 10 November trilateral statement signed by the leaders of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia put an end to the armed conflict and set agreed parameters for establishing durable peace in the region. Our country improves humanitarian situation in the liberated territories of Azerbaijan and aims to move forward towards a speedy post-conflict rehabilitation. However, with a deep regret, I have to say that with such a rhetoric, Armenia just continues its irresponsible and provocative policy and aggressive actions of the country threaten regional peace and security. Thank you for attention.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. Vernon White from Canada, please.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for the presentations this morning and to Mr. Kassionis for the report, and in particular, the commentary focused on right-wing extremism. I'll change the channel slightly from many of the previous speakers, and we'll be speaking to that growing and sustained radical right extremism across almost, if not all, of our nations. I would offer that we have seen and continue to see the evolution of this radical right extremism from a national to a greater transnational problem. The steady growing discord between what is described as mainstream society and the non-mainstream right-wing extremism, while certainly not a new movement, is gaining in prominence. Ideologically motivated violent extremism and the groups and individuals involved are becoming emboldened by that very growth. While the core component of this extremism is centered around anti-establishment and often anti-government, there is as well often an awkward nationalistic viewpoint. The norm for those involved in right-wing extremist groups, collective often entails maintaining a role in combating an imaginary, even self-constructed threat. Many in these groups would identify that society is collapsing, their engagement necessary to combat the group or groups that they espouse are causing the problems, and they would often identify the center of their hate focused on specific ethnicity, culture, or religion, and most often hold an anti-immigration mindset. While these groups and individuals may have a political agenda, they have largely, thankfully, been unsuccessful in the mainstream political arena. The current pandemic has given some of those groups a new agenda item, breeding distrust for the government and its actions to control the growth of the pandemic. The celebrity of these extremist groups has as well brought people along who otherwise would have been isolated, and with this engagement now see a greater commitment and involvement to a cause. The necessity of each of our security agencies to focus inward on these groups means it will further stretch their already thin resources. The head of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service says his agency is more and more preoccupied with the threat of violent right-wing extremism and white supremacists. This has been seen in country after country as a report doubling and even tripling of events perpetrated by the radical right extremist groups, some countries identifying that the work to counter these groups is taking up nearly 40% of their security services work. As we saw in Canada in the listing of Proud Boys as a terrorist organization joining the likes of ISIS and Al-Shabaab, maintaining surveillance on the activities of these groups will be key for agencies and law enforcement going forward. This listing can and does serve as a wake-up call for all of us, but alone will not stop their violent actions. Considering the reach, connections, transnational associations these groups are exhibiting, concerns raised by security analysts and agencies, it is important that our resources are dedicated to the oversight of their activities. These agencies will need to counter the hate propaganda, white supremacist actions of these groups. Understand clearly, we have seen in other countries, could easily happen in each of our own countries as well. The importance of working together, the work of our security and law enforcement agencies on this issue together has never been more important than now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next in the list, Mr. Johan Busser from Sweden, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and dear members of the committee. Thank you for the discussions on the report, and thank you also for the discussions on international politics. The last year has shown in many ways that we live in challenging times. The COVID pandemic, several unsolved conflicts, crisis for democracy, values and institutions, as well as an ongoing climate change crisis, just to mention some of our common challenges. The importance of international forums like the OSCE for discussions concerning security, stability and prosperity is unquestionable. Throughout the whole region of OSCE, as well as in my own country, we need more trust in our democratic institutions. The increase in the activity of authoritarian movements is challenging many of our democratic values, and it is truly worrisome. Through fear and violence, these movements are trying to undermine fundamental principles of the democratic state. How can we stop? How can we prevent this development? The answer for me as a social democrat is to actively and politically combat the growth of inequalities and growing differences between groups, both domestically and globally. To tackle this development, we cannot only address its consequences, but also its roots. We need to work against inequality and provide the opportunities needed for people to have the possibility to shape their own lives, and thereby building trust for our institutions and creating a shared sense of optimism for the future. Also, apart from this, we need to stand together and guarantee that liberal rights and so-called liberal democracy must be respected. In countries where democracy is already under pressure, we have seen a decline in the freedom of the people, with increases in violence against protesters, abuse of power, and violations of fundamental human rights. And notably, we see threats against minorities as well as gender equality. We surely must handle the ongoing conflicts in the OSCE region, and this is also one of the most fundamental tasks of our organization. It is also highly prioritized for the Swedish chairpersonship. As I have mentioned, in order to effectively address these challenges, we need to work together. Some of the developments that we can observe should also indicate that we should work more closely together through institutions like the OSCE, PA, and safeguard our opportunities to meet, for example, through our annual session and this summer meeting. These kinds of forums are crucial to establish the foundation needed for a more secure OSCE region. Finally, it is with great regret that I cannot, as a head of the Swedish OSCE delegation, take part physically in this year's summer meeting in Vienna. Due to the ongoing political crisis in Sweden, I need to stay at home, respecting the vote in Parliament on our Prime Minister during the next week. Although I'm looking forward to seeing you all in person as soon as possible. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Please note we have two more speakers on the list, and that will conclude the list of speakers for the debate. We have noted 4 requests for the floor for second interventions. As agreed with the chair, these members will be recognized for 1 minute once the list of speakers has concluded. We move now to the next speaker on the list, Dr. Daniela De Rieder from Germany, please.
Yes, thank you, dear Gustavo, dear colleagues, cher Kollege, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Auch ich möchte mich bei Laurinas und Richard für ihren wertvollen Bericht bedanken und ich spreche heute als Sonderbeauftragte unserer Parlamentarierversammlung für Osteuropa zu Ihnen. Und ich muss Ihnen sagen, ich fülle dieses Amt seit einem halben Jahr aus und ich finde die Situation sehr besorgniserregend. Das liegt am restriktiven Umgang mit dem Versammlungsrecht in unseren zu beobachtenden Ländern. Das ist die arbiträre Handhabung des Demonstrationsrechts, was aus unserer Sicht ein fundamentales Recht ist. Es geht auch um die massive Beeinträchtigung der Zivilbevölkerung und, wie schon erwähnt, um die Beschränkung der Pressefreiheit. Wir haben dem als OSZE-Parlamentarierversammlung viel entgegenzusetzen. Freie und faire Wahlen etwa, eine faire Prozesse und die Freilassung von politischen Gefangenen, aber auch die Einhaltung von Waffenstillstandserklärungen und das Verbot von Diskriminierung gehört ebenfalls dazu. Ich meine hier nicht nur die Geschlechtergerechtigkeit, sondern auch die Frage der Rechte, der zu schützenden Rechte sprachlicher Minoritäten. Lassen Sie mich ganz kurz zu den einzelnen Ländern kommen. Ich bin Herrn Savinik als Delegationsleitung aus Belarus sehr dankbar, dass er bereit war, sich in Gespräche mit mir zu begeben. Es ist aber auch unsere Pflicht und unser gutes Recht, mit Oppositionspolitikerinnen und Politikern ins Gespräch zu gehen. Ich hatte dazu Gelegenheit, etwa mit Frau Tichanowskaja, und ich möchte dazu auch dem Büro für die Vermittlungsarbeit sehr herzlich danken, insbesondere auch unserem Präsidenten Lord Bonis, der mich da auch ermutigt hat, diese Gespräche zu führen. Wir haben das Recht und die Pflicht, auch uns Sorgen zu machen über inhaftierte Oppositionspolitikerinnen und auch die aktuelle Regierung darin zu unterstützen, ihre Verfassungsreform voranzutreiben, aber dies unter Berücksichtigung der Interessen der Opposition. Anders als geschildert, stellen wir uns einen anderen Umgang mit Herrn Protasevich als Blogger vor. Ich will zur Republik Moldau sagen, dass ich große Hoffnung habe, dass wir viele in der kommenden Woche bei der Wahlbeobachtungsmission, viele Kolleginnen in Chisinau wieder treffen. Auch hier ist schon angesprochen worden, dass der Transnistrien-Konflikt noch ungelöst ist. Wir betrachten ihn momentan noch als Frozen-Konflikt. Aber wir haben leider gesehen, dass bei Aserbaidschan und Armenien ganz schnell aus einem Frozen-Konflikt ein warmer und verheerender Krieg werden kann. Lassen Sie mich ganz zuletzt auf die Ukraine eingehen und hier Andreas Notelle für die Vermittlung von Gesprächen mit der OSZE-Sonderbeauftragten Heidi Grau Danke sagen. Sie hat nochmal ausdrücklich darauf hingewiesen, wie wichtig die Wahrung des Waffenstillstandes entlang der Kontaktlinie ist. Wie wichtig es ist, dass wir darauf beharren, dass Minen hier geräumt werden, beseitigt werden. Es gibt eine ganz verheerende Bedrohungslage für die Zivilbevölkerung. Und das ist eben keine Petitesse, sondern wir müssen hier die Zivilbevölkerung besser und nachhaltiger schützen. Dazu gehören auch der Abbau etwa von Bürokratismus an dem kleinen Grenzverkehren. Und vor allem hat sie darum gebeten, dass wir auch auf das Foltergefängnis Izolatia aufmerksam machen. All dies sind Dinge, die wir unbedingt abbauen müssen. Und ganz kurz vielleicht noch eine Bemerkung zu unseren russischen Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Sie sind in einigen Berichten eher als Teil des Problems geschildert worden. Ich bin aber der felsenfesten Überzeugung, dass sie unbedingt im Dialog ein Teil der Lösung sein müssen. Und deshalb freue ich mich auf persönliche Begegnungen, hoffentlich in Wien mit Ihnen, um diese Lösungen auch voranzutreiben. Ganz herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. Now we come to the last speaker, the list of speakers of the general debate, and is Mr. Jean-Yves Lecomte, France. Vous avez la parole, monsieur.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais d'abord saluer la qualité et l'esprit du rapport de M. Kashunas, la précision et la modération sur l'ensemble des sujets qu'il aborde. Je pense que nous pouvons tous partager l'inquiétude sur l'évolution du multilatéralisme, même si il faut saluer l'évolution des positions américaines depuis janvier 2021 et en particulier celles qui ont permis un accord majeur sur la taxation des multinationales, qui est un vrai signal d'espoir pour le multilatéralisme. J'espère aussi que nous nous retrouverons bientôt en présentiel, parce que pour faire vivre l'esprit d'Helsinki et aussi notre rôle de parlementaire, je crois que nous avons besoin d'être directement en présentiel. Je crois que des paroles comme celles que nous avons tout à l'heure entendues de notre collègue biélorusse, qui sont un petit peu surréalistes, pourraient au moins être suivies d'échanges directs et peut-être un peu moins contraints. Je voudrais aussi saluer l'engagement de la Russie pour le cessez-le-feu et la surveillance de celui-ci après la déclaration trilatérale du 9 novembre 2020 entre la Russie, l'Arménie et l'Azerbaïdjan, pour un conflit qui en 2020 fut particulièrement coûteux en vie humaine pour l'Arménie, avec d'énormes déplacements de population arménienne, et un sujet qui reste humanitairement très sensible et qui doit continuer à nous mobiliser, parce qu'au-delà du cessez-le-feu, il faut maintenant une solution politique durable qui est indispensable pour protéger les populations. Et je crois, comme le rapport le dit, que c'est essentiel que le groupe de Minsk soit particulièrement mobilisé et soutenu pour cela. Enfin, je voudrais aborder la question ukrainienne et d'abord saluer la diversité des prises de position de la délégation ukrainienne qui montre combien sa démocratie est vivante. Nous savons combien la Russie n'hésite pas à rentrer dans les affaires intérieures de l'Ukraine. Nous l'avons encore vu tout de suite sur les commentaires qui ont pu se faire sur les débats de la Rada, sur l'annexion illégale de la Crimée en 2014, malgré les engagements pris à Budapest en 1994 par la Russie. Et cette attitude et l'engagement russe dans les régions de Donetsk et Lugansk qui sont une réelle menace sur l'ensemble de la sécurité européenne. Il est clair que de ce point de vue-là, il est absolument indispensable que la mission spéciale d'observation des frontières de l'OSCE puisse continuer sa mission dans des conditions de sécurité idéales, avec des engagements forts de la Russie pour que ça puisse être le cas. Je crois que ce conflit est un conflit majeur qui déstabilise l'ensemble de l'Union européenne et nous devons vraiment faire en sorte que les Ukrainiens puissent continuer à choisir leur avenir de manière souveraine, sans intervention extérieure de manière systématique. Et je crois que c'est vraiment un engagement essentiel de l'OSCE. Merci.
Thank you very much. This concludes the list of speakers. We now have 4 interventions of members that will intervene for a second time. As agreed, the chair will recognize them for one minute each. And again, this list is also closed. And with that, we will conclude the general debate. So first, Vice President Asai Guliyev from Azerbaijan. You have 1 minute, please.
Thank you, dear Gustavo. I wanted to thank those colleagues who rightly emphasized the efforts that needs to be put by the OSCE and the other OSCE institutions in order to tackle the issues related to the post-conflict situation between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I think it was a right approach because we need really to have a dialogue and to achieve finally the peace agreement with Armenia. Of course, we need a lot of efforts of the international community, particularly the OSCE. But unfortunately, some of the other members, particularly Monsieur Tessier, did something contrary, which I found counterproductive. He acknowledged that he has been promoting aggression and separatism and occupation in the South Caucasus region, particularly when it comes to Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. I do believe that this type of speech and approach is very harmful and doesn't serve to the peace and security in the region. I would recommend him to refrain from making such a poisoning statement that really doesn't mitigate the situation or the tension already existing in the region. Thank you, dear Gustavo.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Mikita Poturai from Ukraine. 1 minute, please.
Well, colleagues, we've heard today a lot of things that twisted the meaning of UN declaration for the rights of indigenous people. We also heard again a lot of misinformation about Ukraine. And you know what? The president of Russian Federation, Mr. Putin, and his representatives, they like to repeat that Russian Federation is a brother to all former USSR nations and countries. So let me remind the quote from a very old but still actual book. And the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" And he said, "I have no idea. Am I my brother's keeper?" I think that it's enough for us to understand Russian policy. And let me thank you again, Mr. Laurinas Kachunas and Mr. Richard Hudson.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Yusuf Basser from Turkey.
Sayın
1
Yusuf
minute,
Basser,
please.
Türkiye'den 1 dakikanız var. Buyurun lütfen. We are not good with the biased attitude of France. Turkey is not expansionist. Turkey is contributing to peace and stability in the region, and Turkey is trying to deepen the relations with the neighboring countries. And Turkey is always supporting the territorial integrity with the neighboring countries and other countries. Well, the thing is, for Turkey, if you call Turkey expansionist, then I think you're expansionist. This is how we call it in Turkey. As mentioned in the report of multilateralism, there are some Armenians displaced during the conflict, and there have been improvements in taking those people back. But what about the Azerbaijan people who were displaced during the 28 years of expansion and also occupation of Armenia? Because of the mines, thousands of mines Armenia planted, Azerbaijani people cannot go back to their hometowns. And there are 144 Azerian people who lost their lives to the mines planted by Armenia. We have to be reminded of this fact. I think you missed that. Peace cannot be unilateral. Peace can only happen multilateral and bilateral. So this Azerbaijan took back the territory from Armenia, and occupation is now over. So there is no conflict, there is no protracted conflict in the region. And as to the terrorism, on the other hand, I think everyone should appreciate the efforts of Turkey against terrorism. And Turkey's efforts to fight terrorism will also contribute to the stability and safety of OSCE regional countries as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we come now to the last speaker, Mr. Ike Conjorian from Armenia. 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much. I want to thank representatives of Canada and France for their remarks. And I'm glad to see that Mr. Guliev admitted the role of OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs. And I hope that in the future, Mr. Guliev will continue this constructive way and will admit that OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs will have their special role for conflict resolution. And I would like to stress that Nagorno-Karabakh conflict hasn't been resolved, and that was highlighted also by OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs. And I hope and I call my Azerbaijani colleagues to refrain from violent and warmongering rhetoric, to come to the constructive field of discussions and to not endanger peace and stability in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This concludes the general debate. Mr. Chairman, Congressman Hudson, back to you in Washington.
Thank you, Gustavo. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for your valuable contributions and interventions. I'd like to now offer our rapporteur the opportunity to reply or add any comments that he would like to make. Lorenas?
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, thank you for warm words, for critical words. It's a good motive to move forward. I just, few words to Mr. Slutsky when he said he feels like in time machine or nothing new in all our reports already for a decade. So to help us to get out from this time machine, just change your security and foreign policy, and it would be easier not to be for a federation a hero of all the reports, which is annually repeats the same problem. So be a game changer. So thank you all for your words and ideas.
Thank you very much. So we'll now move on to our next and last item on the agenda, other business. I don't know if we've had anyone sign up yet, Gustavo, but I do have one item of business I need to raise as chairman. I can. Do you have anyone that's signed up, Gustavo?
We don't have anybody under this item, Mr. Chair.
Great. Well, then I will again take the chairman's prerogative and put forth one item that I wish to raise, and that is the elections of the officers of the committee. As you know, the current members of the Bureau of our committee have declared their candidacies for the positions they currently hold, and understand that no opposing candidates registered before the deadline. Thus, the only candidate to serve as rapporteur is Mr. Kashunas. Mr. Donava is the only candidate for the position of vice chair of the committee, and it appears that I'm the only candidate for the chairmanship. Due to the absence of other candidates, the Bureau of the committee will be elected by acclamation, and the official results will be announced by the President of the Assembly on July 6th. I look forward to thanking you all for your support after that result becomes official. I'd like to thank all of you for today's very productive meeting. I really enjoyed the interventions and the discussion. And as we close, as always, I need to thank our interpreters for their valuable contribution to our work here today. With that, thank you, colleagues. I declare this meeting of the General Committee on Political Affairs and Security adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Richard. Congratulations again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.